private nonprofit research organization, which undertakes and disseminates unbiased economic research among public policy makers, business professionals, and the academic community. He is also an assistant professor of education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Here he teaches some courses such as understanding educational inequality through the lens of economics and race, and how the future of work in the field of education. He is also serving as a principal investigator at the Blair Economics Lab, which is a research group based at Clemson University in the US. His group's research is in applied microeconomic theory, which focuses on the supply side issues of higher education, the effects of occupational licensing on the labor market discrimination, and the link between residential segregation and educational outcomes. Dr. Blair has a PhD in applied economics from the Wharton School. He holds an MA in theoretical physics from Harvard University and a Bachelor of Science in Physics and Mathematics from Duke University. Also, he is from the beautiful islands of the Bahamas. And without further ado, I would hand it over to Dr. Blair.
Thank you so much, Grace, for that really kind introduction. I want to say good morning to everybody. Wherever you are tuning in from the world, it's really great to be a part of this session. And also a special thanks to all of the organizing team too. Kumbi, you and your organizing team have done a terrific job. And I just want to say that what you're doing is a model for so many other countries and continents in terms of what you as young people can be doing to like push the conversation forward in terms of the future of work. I'm especially heartened to see so many women who are taking leadership on this issue, right? Because it's important that the voices of women, and in particular Black women and African women, be elevated in this conversation. So thank you all for having me here. And I just want to, mention that the research group that I founded is now currently housed at Harvard University. And in addition to that affiliation, I want to mention to my affiliation as a co-director of the Project on Workforce at Harvard, which is a joint collaboration between the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I'm a assistant professor, and then also the Harvard Kennedy School, and then the Harvard Business School. So this is certainly something that is on the mind of Harvard in a really serious way as an institution. And it's certainly something that's on my mind individually as a professor and as a principal investigator for my research lab. And then also someone who is coming from a developing country. That's certainly a lens that I will bring to this conversation as well too. And so just wanted to set that groundwork and say, again, thank you all so much for being here. I'm super excited. I've been up since about 4:30 this morning, getting myself set up for this talk. So what I want to do here is I want to break this talk up into three parts. So first, I want to tell you a little bit about a kind of like theoretical and to give you like a framework for how you can think about the future of work and the relationship between the future of work and the future of education. And then you can think about like internships as a component of that has to do with like, how do you make the transition from having the skills and the education that you develop and then making that linkage into the labor market. So that'll be the first part of my remarks. And then the second part of my remarks is going to be practically, what are some ways in which each of you here, whether you are a student, a policymaker, a practitioner, how can you create opportunities to equip yourself to be prepared to engage in the future of work within your context in the African continent, but also more broadly in the world. And then the third part of my talk, I want to address some issues that relate to what are some of the potential like obstacles that one might have to overcome, right? What are some ways in which the context, the culture that you exist in could be used as a leverage point to accelerate the work that you're doing? As someone from the developing world, also, I mean, oftentimes like we see the fact that we're from an emerging country as being a limitation. And there are some ways in which the institutions or the resources are limited in our context. But then there are also some ways in which precisely because those resources and institutions don't exist, we have the capacity to create something new, something fresh, something innovative that's responsive to our context, we have the opportunity to be incredibly creative in ways that someone with more resources may not have to be creative. And then that what seems like a liability can become a strength. And so then I'm going to talk about how do we take these liabilities and turn them into strengths precisely because we're in a context that requires us to be creative, that requires us to do a lot more with less. And my hope is by the end of the talk, not only do you have a sense of, broadly speaking, what's a framework for thinking about the relationship between the future of work and the future of education and the connection point with internships, but then also you have some action steps in terms of what are some specific things that you personally can do, or maybe some ways if you are a teacher or a policymaker, what are some of the ways in which you can empower youth to be able to position themselves to take advantage of the future of work? And then at the end of this talk, to be able to think about, like what are some of the potential like challenges / opportunities that you have precisely because you're thinking about this work within a specific like context, and how does that relate to the rest of the room? So that's kind of like the big picture overview. And then I know that we're going to have some time at the end for some Q&A where we're going to try to bring this into the current like COVID moment as well too. So that's the plan. So let me give you a little bit of background in terms of how I come to this work and why this work is important for me. One of my important areas of research looks at occupational licensing, which has to do with what are the requirements that somebody has to have in order to legally work for pay in a particular job. So you might be familiar with the fact that your doctor is licensed, your lawyer is licensed. There are a lot of other professions where, in addition to the educational requirements, you need to have a licensure. And the licensure really is a specific set of skills that you have to be assessed on so that the public is assured that you can do the work properly. Right. So, and in a lot of ways, like licensure is kind of like education. And, historically, economists have thought about occupational licensing as only being a labor market friction, as something that keeps people out of professions because it's this barrier to entry, but not having any positive impacts. Now, what we find in our work is that licensure actually reduces racial and gender wage gaps because people who otherwise would face discrimination in the labor market, they have this credential that says, I am qualified to do the job just equally as well as a man or as equally as well as a white person, for example. And so both racial and gender wage gaps, we find them to be reduced in this context. And so as I started to do this work, it really reshaped the way that I started to think about education. Because typically, at least in the US context, we often think about education as going to a four-year college. And other forms of like skill development are less on the radar, right? But licensure is a way to develop skills. The skills that you develop going to community colleges, vocational institutions, those are incredibly important. The skills that you develop when you are interning with a company, those are incredibly important. The skills that you develop just by working on the job, right? Many jobs actually train you. And in a sense, that's one of the reasons like why it's important to get internships so that you can get those skills and demonstrate competence and experience. And so this work on licensure really started to rethink the way that I thought about skills and the role of education and skills and what actually counts as education. And as I saw myself getting invitations to various national and international bodies to like talk about the future of work and how different ways of thinking about skills factored into the future of work, whether it's the knowledge that somebody would get from a coding boot camp or the knowledge that somebody would get from like vocational training. What I realized was that we need to really rethink the social contract between workers, the government, and firms, right? Because now in the light of these myriad of ways of like getting these sorts of skills, it requires a different kind of connective tissue um, between workers and firms, between the government and firms, between the government and workers too, in terms of number one, who provides those skills, and number two, who pays for those skills, and number three, how do we reskill people? So to put some more flesh on this, imagine a context in which uh, we're moving towards like skill development that's a lot more specifically matched to the firm, right? And you can think about this as going on an internship where you learn how the specific processes of that firm work. You also are going to learn some general things about the broader industry too, right? So who should pay for that experience? Should that be an unpaid internship? Should that be a paid internship? And then how do you validate those skills in a way that are relevant to not just that specific job, but to the broader industry, and then also to other industries as well? So I think that that's a really important question that we have to really like think about. Who bears the burden of like paying for the training, and then also to how do those credentials kind of like translate, and how portable are they across like different contexts too? So I think that that's a really important cutting edge question. And you know, as I sat at a lot of these conversations, I saw that this was something that was still very much so in development. And so this got me thinking a lot about the future of work. And so, you know, as a professor, whenever you want to learn something, what you do is you teach it. And so, because I wanted to delve a lot more deeply into trying to understand how the social the social contract between firms, workers, and the government should change in response to the future of work, you know, I decided to teach a class on how is the future of work going to shape the future of education at Harvard University. And Kumbi was in that class, and Grace was in that class as well too. And I have to tell you that these two women are a force of nature, even at Harvard University. And so you are led by two really fierce, intelligent, fearless people. Um, and after the course preview that we had, well, actually in the course preview, both Grace and Kumbi asked a very important question. And they said, Professor Blair, how is your class going to be responsive to the African context? Because when people talk about the future of work, oftentimes they think about the American context. They're thinking about Silicon Valley, they're thinking about Tesla, Facebook, you know, Google. But the African context is very different in terms of the demographic profile of the country, the access to the resources and the infrastructure that's necessary to support a lot of these future of work things like reliable internet, reliable electricity, and how are you going to make this course relevant to us? And for me, that was a very arresting question, because to be quite honest, up until that point, I had not deeply thought about how the class that I was teaching was going to be responsive to the African context or even an international context. And so later on that day, I saw Grace and Kumbi in the lobby at Gutman Library, which is one of the libraries at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And I said, I want to talk to you about this important question that you asked me. And for the next 2 hours, 2 whole hours, we sat there and we talked about their experiences at Harvard. We talked about the ways in which oftentimes the perspectives of Africans and the African context is neglected from the curriculum. And, and and I promised them, I said, I am going to make sure that I think more deeply about this question and really infuse this course material with something that is going to be responsive to the African context, right? And something that is going to help you to feel as if you're equipped to go back to your countries and to the continent with a message, with a framework to be able to speak about the future of work. And I'm so grateful that they spoke up and that they challenged me as a faculty member at Harvard University to make the pedagogy that I was putting forth responsive to what their needs are and what the needs are for a continent of over like 800 million people. Africa is important. Africa is relevant. And the future of work in Africa is understanding the future of work within the African context is incredibly crucial. Okay. So I want to start off the first part of my talk by just introducing you to a framework that I created to describe the future of work, because I think it's important for us to have a common knowledge in terms of understanding conceptually what the future of work is about, because then that will help us to take this framework and apply it across different contexts, and then to use it to make sense of like what are some of the opportunities and what are some of the challenges. So I'm going to start the first part of my talk, which is to really delve into what that framework is. And so the way that I think about the future of work is I think about the future of work as really being driven by technologies, and in particular being driven by technologies that are either going to replace or to enhance the way that we as humans do life. And I necessarily want that to be like very broad, because I want that to be something that you can go back to your coworker, you can go back to your member of parliament, you can go back to your teacher or to the person who's the CEO at your company, and to say that the future of work really is about how does technology either replace or enhance the way that humans like work and do life. Okay. Now, we can break up the way that we as humans kind of like work and do life into three like really broad categories. And I call this the BMC model. As humans, we have like a body that has a certain physicality to it that can like physically do stuff, that can lift stuff, and that can move stuff. The M stands for mind. We have a mind that allows us to think and to perceive and to make decisions. And then we also do life in community, right? We have relationships with people, we have families, we have ethnic identities, we have like church and religious communities that we're part of where we kind of like interact in a very social context. And as someone growing up in the Bahamas, and as and having spent some time on the African continent in Kenya, I know that community is also an incredibly important part too of the cultural fabric, not just of the African context, but of the global context. So BMC, body, mind, and community. Now, how do we use that framework to map that onto the technologies that are changing the way that we work? So in terms of bodies, you can think about robots as either replacing or enhancing the physicality of humans. You have robots in warehouses that can go and pick things and make sure that those things get put in boxes and they can get shipped. You have drones that can pick up and they can fly and they can disperse seeds to help to like seed agricultural produce. So robots is robots connects to like the way in which technology could be impacting kind of like the future of work through either replacing or enhancing like our ability to physically do stuff. In terms of the mind and our ability to perceive things and to make decisions and to make judgments, you can think about artificial intelligence as being the piece of technology that's related to the future of work, which is going to be either enhancing the way that we make decisions or replacing us from making those decisions. Let me give you a couple of examples. If you use technologies like Spotify or Netflix, I'm a huge fan of Netflix. I've recently started to get into Queen Sono, which I love. um, Netflix is able to look at the choices that you made and then to recommend subsequent movies for you, right? And so think about that. That is effectively acting like a mind that's saying, this is how Kumbi is going to think based on the choices that she's previously made. Let me offer her up some suggestions, right? And so artificial intelligence is replacing like the role of reviewers in that context, whereas we would previously have gone to look and say, what are some movie reviews? What did a journalist say about like the current offerings of Netflix? And it's not just artificial intelligence is not just replacing skills that are in a sense kind of like intermediate skills. Even there are even companies like Eigen Technologies and Retina AI that are using artificial intelligence to really complement and in some cases kind of like replace some of the tasks that highly skilled people would do. So for example, with Retina AI, what they're able to do is to look at retinal scans and then to diagnose like what are some diseases that the retinal scans are showing in real time using artificial intelligence, right? And so here you have a technology that's able to like help doctors to do their jobs in ways that are like a lot more fast, efficient, and scalable as well too, right? And then the C part has to do with community, the way in which we interrelate with each other. And the technologies that are really fundamentally shifting the way that we do community are platform technologies that that are powering the gig or the sharing economy. So think about something like Uber or Lyft or Zim rides, right? The way that we call a taxi and we hail a taxi and like then they take us to where it is that we want to go, right? So this is the way in which these are the technologies that are shaping the way that we're going to be working in the future: body, mind, community, robots, artificial intelligence, and platform technologies. Now, the second part of it is then saying, how are these technologies shaping the future of education? Or for our particular discussion, we can think, how is it shaping the future? How is it shaping the future of training? And we can see internships as kind of like a part of that question as well, too, right? And so there are two potential ways that the future of work is shaping the future of training or the future of education. The first is that it can change the value of getting certain skills. If you're in a sector where AI or robots or a platform technology is likely to replace the task that you do at your job, then in a sense, that diminishes the value of that particular training. And so it's like, why am I going to go to school to do X if in 5 years a robot is going to be able to do that job? There may be other contexts in which the changes in technology could actually augment your skills. So for example, if you foresee that artificial intelligence is going to be like a really important part of the future of work. Maybe you are a farmer. You know, I grew up on a farm in the Bahamas. We had mangoes, avocados, guavas, etc. Then maybe what you would want to do is say, I'm going to actually learn how to use artificial intelligence, and I'm going to learn how to program robots so that they can help me with my crop cultivation. So I can take the same 3-acre farm in the Bahamas and use that to drive even more productivity. So these technologies could also, like, in a sense, increase the value from certain types of education and training. So that's kind of like the first piece, right? The second piece is these technologies could also fundamentally change the way in which education happens, not just changing the value of whether or not you should get a college degree or an internship or specific sets of skills. And ways in which these technologies can change the way in which education is deployed could be, for example, there's some work at the MIT Media Lab that uses social robots as a way of like teaching kids certain skills or being teaching aids in the classroom. There's some work at a university in Georgia where they use artificial intelligence to create what are called chatbots, which are used to field students' questions about like how do they get financial aid, how do they navigate course material, right? And so in a lot of ways, these technologies can change the way in which education is also delivered, right? And there's another piece about this that came out of the conversation that Grace and Kumbi and I had at Harvard as well too, is, and Grace, you made this point. You said, look, like imagine a kid going into a classroom and seeing a robot, the sense of joy and wonder that that kid might see too. And so there's also a way in which technology can increase the imagination and the capacity to dream, right? So this is kind of like the first part of the talk in terms of saying, what is the future of work? How do we put that within this BMC framework? And then also, how is the future of work shaping the future of education in terms of number one, changing the value of education, because it's either going to be enhancing your productivity or replacing labor. And sometimes it's going to be doing both for different segments of the labor market. And then secondly, changing the way in which education is going to be delivered, education or even like training. So you can imagine somebody using an artificial intelligence technology to like help to train you up during the course of an internship about how to do the work that you're going to do. Now let me just do a time check. How much more time do I have, Grace, before we go to Q&A? I just want to make sure that I keep on time.
You have about 15 minutes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so now to move into the second part of the talk, the big question is like, how can you prepare yourself for the future of work or skill yourself for the future of work? Just to look at this at an individual level. And then from there, the third part of the talk is really going to say, what are some ways in which the broader society, the government can provide like infrastructural support to help to accelerate the work that you as an individual will do and that you as a community can do together. And the first thing that I want to really say is that something that's incredibly compelling about Africa when we look at the demographics is that Africa is a young continent. So just pause on that for a moment. So what that means is that each of you here, you are the future, right? And so just stop for a second and say, I am the future of Africa. I am the future of Africa. I am the future of Africa. You are. And that's incredibly exciting, like more so than the US, more so than Europe, more so than any other continent. Like when you look at the amount of people who are young within the African context, it far outstrips that proportion in the US. Like in the US, the boomers are the bigger generation than the young folks, right? And so what that means is that like what happens here, what you do is going to impact the future of the continent. And so I'm really excited to talk about what is it that you can do to equip yourself for the future of work. Something that's incredible about the African context is many countries in Africa, just like the Bahamas, got independence in the 60s, the 70s, the 50s. And so in terms of like national age, we're pretty young, right? The 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. By contrast, the United States got independence in 1776, right? And so like Africa is young. And what that means is that it also has the capacity to learn from a lot of the lessons of a lot of other countries too. So whereas, you know, in the US, a lot of our training happens in universities and happens in kind of like formal structures, it's like we now are in the internet age, right? And if you are in a rural part of the country where you don't have access to a school, but you have access to the internet, right? You can still learn everything that you need to learn because everything now is online, right? So you can go to, you know, edX, Coursera. I mean, you just pop into Google. I want to learn how to build a robot. I want to learn artificial intelligence. I want to learn more about the gig economy. And you can learn all of that on your own. And so be entrepreneurial in terms of like seeking out specific bodies of knowledge and really availing yourself of opportunities to be someone who is self-taught. That's something that even when I was coming through school, I'm only 35 years old, but when I was coming through school, like if we wanted to learn something, we had to physically go to a library. We had to open up a library book and then we had to like read through it. We had to get a librarian to help us to find where the book is. You don't have to do that as young people. You can just pop it into Google. And so be really entrepreneurial in terms of like trying to identify what are the specific skills that you want to like learn and then learn those things. And once you learn those skills, the other thing that's really incredible is that you have a market for being able to get paid for those skills. There are lots of online platforms, for example, like Upwork, where you can say, you know what, I learned how to be a computer programmer. I learned how to build a robot. I learned how to do X. Now I'm going to be a freelancer and I'm going to apply my skills. And when you do that, your labor market is global. So even if in your specific town, even if in your specific city, the economic situation is not great, it's like people from all around the world will want to have your talent. And there are lots of evidences of that. So for example, Andela, which is a startup that is situated in Africa, is predicated on the idea that there's tons of African talent for computer programming. And many companies in the US leverage the fact that you have this incredibly skilled workforce as a way of powering the technologies that they're going to build, right? Now, even if you're not able to plug into something like Andela, you can plug into something like Upwork after you've already finished getting your training. And now the world is your oyster in terms of doing that. So be incredibly entrepreneurial. And definitely, I want to encourage you to hustle. Now, for the second part, now we should think about, well, what would happen if I go there, I learn how to code, I learn how to like use AI to like make a recommendation algorithm or to like build a company. And then I also am able to like go on Upwork and like apply my trade and I'm like making like, you know, a lot of money to be able to power my company. But now I'm faced with this issue of like resource like scarcity. Maybe I don't have like internet connectivity or I don't have kind of like the cloud computing power, or I run into like this ceiling in a sense that oftentimes you see is coming from like limited infrastructure. Then what do I do next, right? And I should mention as I share these thoughts that in preparation for speaking to you today, I really plugged into like really deep conversations with Kumbi, with Grace, and then also with several entrepreneurs who work in the African context too, because I know that this is a context that I myself am learning a lot more about, and I wanted to make sure that the comments are relevant. So I just want to flag them for you. So I'm Dr. Stephen Odaibo, who is the CEO of Retina AI, which is like the first company, I believe, in the world that's using artificial intelligence technologies to do ophthalmology. Also, Dr. Nick Litombe and his colleague Alex, who are founders of who are founders of the Alliance for AI, which is kind of an umbrella organization for a lot of the things that are happening with artificial intelligence in the African context. And so like all of these folks have like provided me with kind of insight in terms of like what the specific context is. Also, Don Makumbe, who's the founder of Cree Ventures, which is a company, an angel investing fund that invests in early stage African ventures. And they are one of the companies that really helped with leading a funding round for Andela. And so like I really tried to immerse myself with people who are thinking specifically about the context so that I can make my remarks responsive to the African context. And so now when we think about like what do we do when we come into a situation where it's like, yeah, I'm killing it. I'm really doing great. I've learned my stuff. I've gone on the internet. I've applied my trade, but now I'm running into this natural barrier where I don't have like the internet connectivity that I need, or I don't have kind of like the institutional support. And I feel like I'm running into a wall. The first thing that I want to say is it's good to be able to get to that point where you've maxed out what it is that you're able to do, right? And it's important to remain hungry even at that point too, because your benchmark isn't just a local benchmark. It's not just to be the best programmer in your state within Nigeria, right? It's to be the best at what you can do in the whole country, in the continent, and not just in the continent, but in the world, right? Like, why shouldn't you be the most distinguished in the world? What are some things that you can do? Well, I'm a firm believer that necessity is the mother of invention. The very fact that you run into these blockages means that you have to really rethink about how do you deploy the technology in a way that, if you keep the context the same, could still be efficient. So whereas a lot of artificial intelligence technologies are like run and powered by the internet, like what if you start to think about how do you develop AI on an SMS platform? Because if you look at the African context, tons of people have access to cell phones, right? So whereas in the US context, like people are thinking, well, we don't use WhatsApp that much, we don't use text messages that much, we just call and we use video calls, right? But when you go to a developing world context where the cost of calling is expensive and the cost of internet is expensive and internet is unreliable, but SMS isn't, then you start to think in a very different way in terms of like how you leverage the existing infrastructure that actually is reliable, and then you build technology that's responsive to the future of work on top of the infrastructure that you already have there. And you might say, well, Professor Blair, this is kind of pie in the sky. It's not. So there's a startup called WeFarm, which actually uses SMS as a way of like connecting farmers to help them to be like more productive in terms of like how they do their farming, right? So you can build artificial intelligence technologies on top of an SMS platform. And I want to really encourage you to like think outside of the box in like really deep and creative ways. In talking with Dr. Litombe, he mentioned to me a startup as well too. That's I believe an African startup where you're able to like use a cell phone and to use the sound in the cell phone as a way of like imaging your lungs. So that way you don't need like an MRI, which is going to cost like a ton of money, but you could just simply use like your cell phone as a medical device, right? Now, if we did not have the financial constraints, you would still be thinking, how do we pay for an MRI and bring in an MRI machine, which is going to cost like hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Instead, because of that constraint, you're forced to think a lot more creatively and adaptively in that context. And then you're able to deliver a solution that is cheaper and that's also scalable given the state of where things are, right? And ultimately that creates knowledge that can now flow back to the US context where it's like, hey, you guys were spending a lot of money to like do this, but actually, we were able to do this like much more cheaply. We were able to do it at scale, and we're able to do it in a way that's portable to other developing country contexts as well, where finances and resources could be an issue. And so what does this do? This basically is saying that African solutions can be global solutions. And so just stop there for a moment. And I want you to say that so that that gets into your spirit. Just say African solutions can be global solutions. African solutions can be global solutions. And it's important for you to believe that not only do you need to use the technologies for the future of work to be responsive to your own context, that's incredibly important because you don't want to just take something off the shelf from the US or from Europe and say, oh, this is how we do it in the US. Now we're going to do it exactly that way in Africa. And we need to build out the electrical grid and we need to do this and we need to do that and we need to do all of these things because you would be there forever trying to catch up with countries that have been, in existence for, over 200 years, like longer, building old technology instead of trying to think about how do you turn those things that are limitations into strengths and build solutions that are African solutions, but that in turn become global solutions. And so one way that you can do that is to go from a situation in which, in phase 2 of the talk, I talked about how you need to equip yourself individually, right? And now I'm talking about like how you can really leverage what seem like deficiencies and turn those into strengths, but then also to really build what I call an ecosystem of excellence, where what you're doing is you find like-minded people and you say, hey, how can we pool our resources to like work together? Maybe it is that we invest in like some office space whenever COVID-19 is over, because you don't want to be doing that in this particular moment, right? Or we invest in some shared infrastructure that we can both like develop on and like execute on, and we can kind of like mitigate some of the limits to like the resources that that we have, right? And so I want you to start thinking about then how do you start building these ecosystems of excellence that become like proofs of concept and kind of like leverage the power of the group. And so these are some like first steps in terms of one, thinking about, what does the future of work look like? Body, mind, and community, robots, AI, platform technologies, right? Secondly, what are some natural ways that I can, as an individual, you can, as an individual, or you as a mentor can empower some young person, or as a policymaker, empower some young person to then go forth and to say, here's how you can take the existing resources that are available to you on Google, on edX, on Coursera, and like really on YouTube, and like just learn like how to leverage these technologies. And then thirdly, then to think about, okay, we're taking these technologies, we want to adapt them to African problems, we want to adapt them to the African context in terms of leveraging infrastructure that actually exists and that is highly functional, to build onto that, businesses, to build onto that ideas that are going to create African solutions. And then like from there to then think more broadly that African solutions can be global solutions in terms of going back to other developing countries that face similar resource constraints, but that might have a very similar kind of like infrastructure profile. But that could also ultimately go back to developing countries where you can reduce costs and like make it a lot more innovative. Before I close, I want to share with you this story. One of my dear friends, he's a cartoonist in India, for one of their national newspapers, and this must have been about 5 years ago, plus or minus. There was this great movie called Gravity that came out in the U.S., and I think Sandra Bullock was she was the lead actress in it, and that movie cost about $60 million to create. And in the cartoon, uh, what my friend said was, for the amount of money that the U.S. took to put on a movie about outer space, right? India used that same amount of money to actually create a rover that they sent to Mars. And why were they able to like basically create like science at such a cheaper scale? It was because of the resource constraint that required them to be like a lot more innovative. And so really use these things that seem like deficits to be a way to really leapfrog and propel your technologies forward. And the entrepreneurs that I mentioned, so I talked about Don Makumbe from Cree Ventures, I talked about Dr. Stephen Odaiba, I talked about Dr. Nicholas Litombe, who's from the Cameroon, I talked about Alex. Like these are all like African entrepreneurs who are doing excellent work at a global scale. So this isn't something, I don't want you to walk away from this talk thinking, wow, this is really great. I heard from this Harvard professor and I'm really encouraged and inspired. But like, we're not at Harvard, we're not in the US, we can't do this. To really say, no, there are actually people who are doing this work right now, right here on the continent. And hopefully that too inspires you to really leave this meeting today with lots of knowledge and insight from the organizers, from the other keynote speakers and panelists, to then tomorrow wake up and to start doing things yourself, to skill up, to start doing things in community, and then to start thinking about ways that you can take what other people would say are deficiencies or limitations of the African context and turn those into strengths that make you innovative in a way that creates African solutions that you believe are going to be global solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Blair, for that wonderful presentation. We really appreciate taking time this very, very early morning
Very, very early morning. You're welcome.
to be with us. So I have a few questions from some of our participants they sent in before. I think everything that you talked about really centered on technology. And my very first question is, how can people who don't have access to these technologies right now participate in this present and future that you've been talking about? Not just as consumers, and I think that's what a lot of people think when we say there aren't that many resources, but then just like the way you've described, as creators, learners of these technologies.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. So let me answer that question in two ways. The first is I'm going to plug it back into the framework. So I talked about, how we as humans do life is the future of work. So B for body, which is robots, M for mind, which is artificial intelligence, and then C for community. And I'm going to center your question around this notion of community. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to go to this conference that was hosted by Andreessen and Horowitz, which is like one of the leading venture capital firms in the US, where they brought together academics and also business leaders. And I got to meet the CEO of Lyft, and I got to hear their story. And Lyft is a ride sharing company in the United States. Lyft, Uber, like these are the major players. And do you know where the idea came from? The idea came from his time in Zimbabwe. He was there and he saw that people were giving each other like rides, like you just were hacking a ride from someone. And he thought, well, what if we, instead of like having people who are taxi drivers, which requires a lot of licensing and requires a lot of training, give rides? Why don't we have like regular people? They already have cars that they use in their daily life. Why can't they do this as kind of like a side job? And that was his idea. And it was inspired by Zimbabwe. That required no technology, zero. What that required was looking at the way in which people did community and saying, this is really cool. And he took that idea to America. And the first time when these founders, like say like Lyft, Uber, when they were pitching this idea that you should have a stranger come to your house and know where you live, pick you up from your house, and then take you to the house of somebody else that you care about and know your business. Like that is so antithetical to American culture, where you're trained to like be like stranger danger, not say hello to people, to be suspicious of folks, right? But he took an idea that was embedded in how people in Zimbabwe, a country in Africa, do community. And then he came here and reshaped fundamentally the way that people in America do community, right? And so, in a sense, like Lyft and Uber could have been started in Africa by African entrepreneurs and then exported to America, right? African solutions can become global solutions. And so, in a sense, you don't need technology to grasp the future of work. That can plug into this notion of how we do community. But let me zoom out even further. You can think about the precursor to technology is an idea. It's not the technology itself. It's kind of saying, how should the world be? Well, people should share rides. Then that produces a business model. And then that business model requires technology. So the technology really, the physical instantiation of the technology isn't the first thing. It's actually like the second or the third thing. And then even when you think about like the particular context of the African continent, like a lot of people have cell phones, right? And so maybe the way in which the technological deployment looks in Africa may not be the same as the US. Maybe it's not running a platform over the internet, but running a platform over SMS. Maybe it's leveraging the power of WhatsApp as a platform for being able to like conduct business. Whereas in the US, like that's not as much of a thing because people have better access to the internet. And so that links back to the part that I was talking about, Grace, where you really turn like what seem like disadvantages into advantages. I cook a lot. And sometimes, like if I'm cooking, I may not have an ingredient. Like, let's say, for example, I don't have milk, but then I have some yogurt. Then I'm like, okay, I'm making pancakes. I don't have milk, but I need something that's going to be kind of like milk. Well, yogurt is kind of like milk, and I make yogurt pancakes, and it's fine, right? So let's think about ways to be adaptable as well too. Thank you for that question.
Okay, and my next question is something I think is on a lot of people's minds.
Mhm.
How does everything change with regard to the pandemic? Because a lot of the things that you spoke about were set in place prior to the pandemic. That was the
Yeah,
trajectory we were on.
yeah,
I know that it's a little bit premature to make
yeah.
definite statements, but then any,
I have been really heartened in terms of what I see from the pandemic, right? Like normally the narrative that you hear in the West is a very pessimistic narrative about Africa. But when you look at the pandemic, we don't hear stories of African countries like having a problem with the coronavirus that's completely out of control. I can't name a single African country that pops to the top of the list of countries that have had major kind of like headlining infection rates, right? And in fact, there are certain countries, Senegal stands out in my mind as having developed like their own test that you can deploy, I think, in like 15 minutes. And Senegal has been able to do that at scale like really quickly, right? So in some sense, like the pandemic is demonstrating some of the strengths of Africa, which is that, having had the challenges of having to deal with the Ebola virus, having to deal with kind of like AIDS as well too in South Africa and other parts of the continent, like the public health awareness and infrastructure is actually pretty robust in Africa, even relative to the US, in terms of like recognizing that public health is an important issue of national concern, right? And I think that it's certainly a lot less political in the African context. So my view is, in some sense, this is an opportunity for Africa to show leadership in terms of its response to this public health crisis and to even be ahead of the curve relative to countries in the West. Um, I remember when the Ebola virus was the most recent Ebola virus um, outbreak was happening. And like in the West, it was like, oh my God, like the Ebola virus is ravaging Africa, XYZ, so on and so forth. And within a short time frame, that was taken in hand. There was a young woman, I think she may have been in Ghana or Nigeria, who developed this way of like wrapping with like plastic bags, like garbage bags, so that she could help to treat Ebola patients. This is an example of kind of like that ingenuity in the face of like limitations, like really propelling forward. And now we have a vaccine for the Ebola virus. So if anything, I think that the pandemic creates an opportunity for Africa to really think about what is it about the public infrastructure, the public health infrastructure in Africa that makes it so resilient and responsive to these kinds of crises, and then what is it that the rest of the world can learn from how Africa has responded, and in that way like change this meta narrative that one should be pessimistic about Africa and instead say no, like there's some contexts in which Africa is really like a world leader.
Great, thank you so much. So my final question, and you've hinted on this, is about getting tangible resources. I know you mentioned a lot of names that I haven't even heard some of them before, but is it possible to get, and I can coordinate with you after this session, but to get these names and links, maybe LinkedIn profiles, so we can share with our participants
Yes.
who might, yes.
Yeah, I can definitely. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Grace. Was there something else you wanted to say?
No, that was it.
Yeah, I think that that's a really great suggestion. I think that it's really important that you are inspired by the talks, you're inspired by the conversation that's going to happen, that you're writing notes and you're thinking about how can this be made practical to you. And in fact, like right now, I would encourage you to like take like 10 or 20 seconds to just write down like what's like one thing that you were going to do tomorrow that's going to action you. So if you can give me like just like 10 to 20 seconds to allow people to pause and do that. And then after that, I'll talk about what are some of the names and the links that they can look at that I will share. So let's put like 15 seconds on the clock. Okay, so I hope you all have at least one thing that you're going to do tomorrow. And I want you to hold yourself accountable for that. Text your best friend, text, your mom, and say, hey, I committed to doing this one thing tomorrow. I want you to keep me accountable for doing that, because so much of the change starts with you. I find that, especially in this era, so many things are available. Like right now, wherever we are in the world, we're on this call. This was not something that was possible like when I was coming through college. I had to fill out paper applications to apply to college, right? And so like really like, yes, we are in contexts where there are some scarcity of resources, but like we're so far along technologically that there are things that we can do. Grace, I will certainly like send you some of those resources. I can just list a couple here, but I'll send you links too. So you have Black in AI, which is like the leading organization for like artificial intelligence and like bringing together Black people globally to think about AI. And they have conferences like across the African continent, in Ethiopia, in Nigeria, and like a lot of other parts of Africa that you could actually go to in person once everything opens up. And that was started by Africans. So Africans are taking the lead in that. There's also the Alliance for Artificial Intelligence. The two co-founders there, Nick Litombe and Alex, they provided some incredible resources for me, and I'll make sure to share their information as well too. And with the Alliance for AI and also Black in AI, you can see like a lot of other you can think about them as like umbrella organizations that are going to nest like a lot of other, that are going to give you a sense of what are the other pockets and the other like ecosystems where you have like people in the African context, like really thinking very deeply about the future of work. And I'll certainly share those links with you too, Grace. And I want to say thank you to all of you for the pleasure of being able to speak with you. Thank you, Kumbi, for like really asking me to give this presentation. And I want to thank you and Grace for really pushing me to really think about how I can, as a professor, at Harvard and a co-director of this project on workforce, really think about centering the experience of the over 800 million people in Africa. And then also to think creatively about not just about how can we be responsive to the needs there, but then also what are some of the things that we can actually learn from the creativity, from the ingenuity that's going to come forth from the solutions, the African solutions, and how are ways that we can really make those African solutions like global solutions that even we at Harvard and in the US are learning from.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Blair. I think I speak for all the organizers and all the participants on the call when I say we really appreciate your input. Also, I think I speak for me and Kumbi when I say it's really exciting to see how the little drops that we put into the ocean can make such a big impact. And for someone like you in the position that you are, lead you to just consider things that you may have considered before. I think now we are going to take a 10-minute break. And then when we come back, we are going to be talking about the future of work and higher education, which will be led by Roberta Bassett.
Grace, is it possible to get a picture with everyone who wants to be in it? Like, I would love to just see people's beautiful faces. And they know this about me from being in my class. So for all of you who are on the call, if you don't mind turning on your video, if you feel
Such a professor.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing Harvard to
I am sitting in the presence of greatness and African excellence. And like, you guys are going to go forth to change the world. And I want to be able to say at some point that, I got to see you, I got to interact with you and interact with your destinies as well too. So like, I feel honored to be in this picture with you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, so who's going to be taking this screenshot?
God, why are we not so much taking this picture? Everybody, come on.
Yeah.
You've got
God,
5 seconds.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. These
are
the people that are creating the African solutions that are going to be global solutions, right? And so we need to see these faces and we need to, hear these stories. And then we'll be able to look back in a year or two from now and say that we were all together in the same Zoom room, right? Doing this. No, you laugh, but like this is really like how change happens. Like you really have to believe in the excellence of the people that are around you. And I think too often we discount what it is that we do, right? Because for somebody to come in Zimbabwe and to see something that we just do and we think of it as just like, oh, this is just the local taxi hacker. And they're like, this actually could become a multi-billion-dollar business.
Yeah.
We have to really change the way we see ourselves and that we see each other. And so like us seeing your faces, that's a part of that transformation too. Kumbi or Grace, would one of you want to take it? Because you'll also have access to be able to share this with the participants as well too.
Okay, so I will take a screenshot of it. So I'm going to do 1, 2, ready, action. Okay, so just because I don't trust this, I'm going to use my phone so that okay, so 1, 2, action. Yeah, I took a lot, so.
Thank you so much for indulging me. They have been my students at Harvard, so they know that this is like a big feature of what I do in my classroom too, to build a sense of community. This is the C in the BMC model.
Yeah, yes. Thank you so much, Professor Blair. I'm so excited that I had you here. Thank you for listening to us on that conversation we had at Appian Way. And this is what it has turned to, yes. And I think it also gave me a lot of power because I really did not ask that question, considering, you know, it was a cost shopping. And I didn't know if it was the right thing to do without trying to sound like I was putting other continents, you know, out of focus. Yeah, but I think it taught me to represent and to come correct and to ask for what I want. If I wanted to be in that class, I needed this conversation about Africa to be in the center. So I'm excited that we get to do this. And thank you for making a lot of concessions and for changing, having just that, you know, you really made the class amazing. And this is why I'm so excited that I get to bring the future of work at Harvard Graduate School of Education to the National Internship Conference. So thank you so much for having us. We're going to go for the 10 minutes break, but it is now 7 minutes because we were taking some selfies. We will be back at exactly 12:10.
Okay, thank you all so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kumbi. Thank you, Grace, Tokes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, if you're just joining us, we're currently on a 10-minute break. We'll be back at exactly 12:10 to have the session with Roberta Bassett, the Global Lead of Tertiary Education, who is going to be speaking about the future of work and higher education.
Hi, Convey. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. We're
I
on
can't hear you. Ah, there you are.
that break. Yeah.
Good. I know. I'm
Yeah.
twice because um when I talked to World last week, it's like old week. Look at all my friends. Oh, nice.
Thank you so much.
How's it going?
Amazing. We're in a short break.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yes.
Yep.
So excited to see you.
Doing well? Thank you. How's the baby?
She's fine, thank you. She's fine.
Are you in Washington?
Absolutely, yes, I am.
Yeah. Good. But it's early for you then. You were up early today.
Absolutely, yes. All of us are early today.
Yeah. How come you planned it so early then?
Because it's Nigerian time.
Yeah,
It's
but it's
11
early
a.m.
even in Nigeria, no? I mean,
Oh, well,
yeah.
for
Yeah.
for a 4-hour conference, we usually go a little bit, into
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Africans all work very, so we never have meetings. If we, they don't like to have meetings too early in the morning. So we do most of our stuff 5,
Oh,
6, 7 o'clock at night for them, which is great for DC people.
wow.
Anyway, yeah.
That's amazing. That's cool.
Yeah, I think
It
they
has been
prefer,
fun.
I think maybe they prefer it. I don't know. Yeah.
Probably. We knew this was going to take a little while,
Yeah.
so we decided to have it a bit early, 11 a.m.-ish. Yeah.
It's good. Yeah, I mean, you're the one getting hurt, so it's fine. Those of us on this side of the Atlantic, fine. You're the one who has to
Yeah,
get up early.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you look wide awake. That's good.
Yeah, I am. I've been awake for a bit.
So
Yeah. We had a great time this morning, actually, with Peter Blair from Harvard.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it just
Good.
finished this conversation. It was really great. I really enjoyed it.
Morning, Roberta. This is Tokes.
Just hi, good morning. Nice to see you,
Hi.
Tokes.
Good to see you too.
Thank you for sending the questions ahead.
Absolutely. No worries. Where are you calling in from this morning?
Yeah. I live in Lugano, Switzerland. So I'm in Switzerland.
Oh, I had no idea. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. It's
Okay,
random, but
so
it's
I
because
think
my
we're
husband's
good to
work.
go.
So I live here. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Talks over to you.
Okay. All right. So welcome back, everyone. Welcome back from the short break. Thank you for joining us at the Global Internship. We are ready to start the next session. We have our next speaker, Roberta Bassett, who I'll just introduce shortly. So this is a session on the future of work and the role of higher education in that future. Okay, so thank you for joining us, Roberta. Roberta is a global lead for tertiary education in the is the senior education specialist at the World Bank. She provides technical expertise for projects related to tertiary education reform around the world. She has been team lead for a variety of tertiary education projects in Africa and Europe, and also Asia, spanning topics such as finance and quality assurance reform, internationalization of higher education, equity and access, research and competitiveness, and skills development. Roberta currently serves on the editorial board of Higher Education Quarterly and the International Advisory Board of the International Network for Higher Education in Africa. So prior to her joining the World Bank, Roberta has a wealth of experience in higher education, as you can tell, and serving in higher education institutions, as well as being the author of numerous publications on topics related to higher education. So we are truly privileged to have her joining us this morning, particularly on this topic. It's literally just made for you, Roberta. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Tokes, and thanks, Adekunbi. It's a pleasure to be here. And as Kundi is a former student of mine. I would, of course, say yes to anything she asks of me. So it's an honor to be part of this event. Just as an introduction to, although it's a little embarrassing to have my bio read, but yeah, there it is. I am someone who actually gets to provide intellectual leadership and technical leadership over the World Bank's work on tertiary education. It's quite an honor, genuinely, to get to look at these issues globally. But also a large portion of my work program is to lead efforts in East Africa. And so I lead a big higher education project in Tanzania and the African Centers of Excellence initiative in East Africa. So Africa is also very near and dear to my heart. I have a brief presentation about 15, 18 slides, and then we'll go into conversation that Toks will lead. Most of this is actually on the state of tertiary education or higher education in sub-Saharan Africa right now, just to give some context. I have a little bit about the future of work, but in general, the way that we operate is we really seek to support institutions and students as they drive what the future of work will look like for them. So we are ideally very holistic in how we promote higher education and its engagement with the labor market. The World Bank has a tendency to be perceived as very much a driver of education for labor, and we are working very hard to counter that as an organization that supports education and higher education for whole human development. So I'll share my screen, and hopefully this will work. It, sometimes does, sometimes doesn't. Here we go. You can tell me if you can see it okay.
Yep, looks good, Roberta.
That's okay? Okay, great. So I'll just do this relatively quickly. If anyone was at a big event on higher education in Kenya in February, you have seen some of this before. Kunbe has seen a bunch of this already, but anyway, it'll be new for most of you. So just focusing on higher education in sub-Saharan Africa, some of the issues that we are looking at globally, but are also quite relevant for the sub-Saharan region, are these conflicting issues that we live in an increasingly globalized, multicultural world, but we're seeing a rise of national agendas. This is true, very powerfully in the US and Europe, but we also are seeing it increasingly across Africa, and it is having impacts on a generation of work that has been supported interregional and international cooperation. We've seen millions of individuals moved out of poverty over the last 20 years or so, but old inequalities are persisting and new ones are emerging. And we are seeing a spread and an extension of inequity between those who have the most and those who have the least. We're seeing demand for advanced skills. That's going to be a big issue that we'll discuss today. And repetitive jobs disappear. What happens to the laborers who don't have access to advanced skills training? Technical skills remain in very high demand, but also there's a push for transferable and generic skills and sort of a re-evaluation of the liberal arts and core education development. And then there's been a rapid expansion of higher education, but there are still persistent tensions around access, persistence, retention, and quality. So globally, more people than ever now have higher education. You can see here that higher education enrollment has doubled between 2000 and 2013. This is across the world, and this has not, however, been how the expanded. Generally, over the course of massification of higher education, which really began in the wealthiest countries around the 60s and has expanded to large portions of the world since then, it is generally the wealthiest students, the quintiles, who access higher education, even in an expanded in the wealthiest is something that is still quite a challenge for global debate on how effective. But regardless, sub-Saharan Africa has fallen further behind the globe in higher education enrollment, regardless of which quintile is being assessed. Right now, globally, sub-Saharan Africa has the lowest participation rates in tertiary education. And the range of that across the continent is quite broad, between some very low enrollment rates of 4 and 5% of the age cohort attending tertiary education to something around 12 to 15%. But we aren't seeing enrollment rates like one sees in Latin America, or even in Central Asia and the new, lower EU member states, the lower income EU member states. So there's a lot of work to be done in sub-Saharan Africa. And those of you who are part of this event today are going to be the leaders of these efforts. And I look forward to supporting your work there. There is much to be done. So, the elephant in the room whenever the World Bank talks about higher education, tertiary education, is that the World Bank has rightfully been criticized for its impact on investment in higher education in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, where the rate of returns assessments done by economists showed increased rates of return for early school ages up through primary school. So when the World Bank projects, or really what governments were seeking to invest in on this research, focused on primary low investment from foreign donors or national budgets into tertiary education. This actually has changed, and this paper from Montenegro and Petrinas in 2014 actually does a nice job of pivoting the whole argument about the rate of returns to look at not just earnings for society, but for the individual, private, and public, so the impact of tertiary education, and found that in fact tertiary education does have the highest rate of return for individuals. This is notably different based on the scale of tertiary education achievement in the country. So just like normal supply and demand, as those with tertiary education, the proposition, the benefits of tertiary education are in the workplace, but where there is scarcity for tertiary graduate education, those with higher education, the rates of return are still quite high. Southern Africa actually has the highest positive returns for higher education in the world right now. And again, it's a sense of scarcity and the impacts on economic growth and achievement in the workplace. When you have higher skills, there are fewer of you, and the expanded marketplace for higher skills make your skill set more valuable. So in light of all of this, and you see the demand and the benefits of higher education and the labor markets are not doing what we're euphemistically calling their part. They're not playing the role they could be playing in improving access and expansion of higher education opportunity in the sub-Saharan region. Higher education sector has played a weak role in diffusing technology and innovation and promoting entrepreneurship. This is something that is something that Kunbe is doing in her work, really driving entrepreneurial thinking about education. There's a lot to be done in the sub-Saharan region, African region, around technology and entrepreneurial behaviors and innovation. And the labor market is currently lacking effective mechanisms to truly evaluate skills coming out of graduates and the value and the utility of those skills. And the sense of the skills mismatch, which is not unique to Africa. There has never been an employer survey that has said the skills coming out of tertiary education are precisely what they want. Employers would love to have graduates that come in with a skill set specific to their industry. Obviously, that's not what higher education universities are meant to be doing, because as we know, over the last 30 years, the jobs that existed 30 years ago don't exist today, and the ones that will exist in 30 years from now don't exist today either. And so what we're training for, largely, if done well, is an agile, mobile, critical talent pool that can be the drivers of the new economy, the creators of the new jobs, while also serving the economy and the labor market of today. So in recent surveys over the past 20 years, higher education graduates have reported some real challenging experiences across the region. Long job searches are quite normal, higher unemployment rates for graduates than with primary and secondary education, and this is normal as economies move from industrial and agricultural economies into more knowledge-based economies. And then there are factors beyond their control, high graduate unemployment as a consequence of admission policies. The Francophone countries, the graduates often report that the admission restrictions, the admission, I don't know how to say this, protocols make it very difficult to prove that the skills they're bringing into the labor market are relevant to employers. And this is based on a piece of World Bank work, Sharing Higher Education Promise Beyond the Few, Sub-Saharan Africa. That report is available on the World Bank's website. So gains from higher education in Sub-Saharan Africa have not been shared equally. The selection process remains based on persistent social inequities and great disparities actually by gender, geography, and ethnicity. Higher education in the Sub-Saharan African region has remained quite elitist, and I would actually welcome a conversation with those of you from the region about how this experience has played out for you, where students come from mostly the affluent, well-connected families, and as resources become constrained in the African space, as countries are hit for the first time in a generation with fiscal contraction, this is going to make equity policies quite difficult and actually expand the space where the affluent, well-connected families, and this is not just for Africa, this is global. Brain drain is leading to talented tertiary graduates leaving Sub-Saharan Africa region after completing their education. And in many cases, the brain drain happens after secondary education, where talented students who don't have faith in the quality of the higher education coming from their local systems go abroad for first degree. So here's what we know from, you could think of it quite logically, children from wealthy households versus children from poor households. The wealthy students have better access to schools that have better equipment, better teachers, and a focus on skills for future development. And they're also providing academic role models and cultural capital, which often doesn't get discussed much, but social capital is a very powerful driver of economic inequality and opportunity inequality. Whereas children from poor households disproportionately drop out of higher education before the higher education space and are less likely to have access to even information about admission protocols, about supports that exist for them, about scholarship programs, about ways that the system is seeking to close these gaps. Very, very often the lack of information is enough to discourage students from even considering post-secondary education. And the labor market outcomes and the benefits of achieving higher education are often quite mysterious to students who don't have access to this information, and therefore they don't seek higher education because they don't know of the expanded benefits, particularly in the Sub-Saharan Africa region. I'm sorry, it's frozen. Okay, here we go. Did it move? I'm sorry, it's frozen. Okay, here. Just give me 1 second. It's moving on my computer, but it's not moving on the Zoom, it looks like. Okay, here. So some of the key equity patterns that we're seeing in Sub-Saharan Africa, rapid enrollment growth, as I said before, does not necessarily lead to improved access for underrepresented groups. Socioeconomic status of families plays a decisive role. Gender parity has stagnated and is lowest globally in Sub-Saharan Africa. And children born in families where the head of the household has gone to secondary education are much more likely to go to university. And so we're seeing generational pushes to support parents to achieve further and further lifelong learning in order to support their children having more opportunity down the road. Some of the causes of inequities in higher education in Sub-Saharan Africa, I don't know why my computer keeps freezing. Exclusions in pre-tertiary education, the loss of students before they even get to secondary education, financial burdens are inequitable, admissions policies are skewed to support those with strong connections or with incomes that can afford fee-based institutions, and public subsidies are often inequitably distributed among institutions. So some ways of addressing inequity in higher education. And again, this has an impact on the future of work, because who gets to go to these jobs? Who is going to be filling these positions across the continent? Very often they are from the diaspora. There are people who have gone abroad and are coming back and are leading economic development, and that's great. I mean, at no point would I ever say students should not be studying abroad and having the experience they're seeking. But there needs to be also domestic development of students and talent, so that those who don't have access to these global marketplaces for education can contribute effectively and benefit likewise from a more robust economic opportunity, which will pull all of society up at the same time. So ways of addressing inequity in higher education. I don't understand, my computer keeps falling asleep. Some of this we talked about, it is about working higher education institutions, working with secondary schools and even primary schools in some instances to support student persistence at the earliest levels, and to provide information at the earliest points in a student's thinking about their future, about what higher education can do for them and why it's important to stay in school. Very often students leave well before they could even access tertiary education. So increasingly, the higher education sector, the tertiary education sector, is creating partnerships with secondary schools to have open dialogue and opportunities for students to experience the benefits of higher education, going to campuses, seeing what's available, talking to students who have lived their experience. And this has made a big difference. So structurally, at the government side, a lot of this is about governance. It's about what the legislative environments are to support closing the achievement gaps among students. It's about how institutions, those from the wealthiest, the flagship universities, down to the regional small institutions that are serving local communities, how the environments sustain and support those at all levels of the sector. Proper financing and a promise of quality assurance regardless of institution type. One of the things we're talking about a lot at the bank right now is focusing on the holistic system for tertiary education. And in the US, the model is quite clear and robust. It is from everything that happens post-secondary, community colleges, junior colleges, all the way up to world-class universities. This is something we're trying to encourage more countries to consider, especially in light of fiscal constraints, because community college, teacher-driven, skill-oriented, 2-year credentialing type programs are less expensive to operate. And if you create a structure where someone could achieve a first degree through, or a first stage of learning through that, with open pathways and accessible movement between institution types, you could find ways to meet the needs of more students at the same cost. And something, as I've been talking about, we prioritize equity, often in the face of those who would question why. I've been asked recently by many countries, not just their leaders, but actually in workshops like this, why would we consider equity in the face of a pandemic? Really, shouldn't we think about other issues for tertiary education and then deal with equity later? But there's a big cost to society for losing generations who will be excluded in any time where equity is not being given a priority. So we will consider pushing for those who have the softest voice, I think, in this debate. So some of the considerations for higher education and human capital, and some of you may be familiar, the human capital project that's coming out of the World Bank. Most of that, the indicators are for pre-tertiary and health and social protection, but there are some patterns that are also relevant to looking at higher education and how human capital is relating back to higher education. There is increased demand, as I said before, for advanced skills, for socio-emotional skills, for adaptability, and this uncertainty about the demand for medium and low skills and narrow job-specific skills. And so, more and more, we're encouraging institutions to look at the labor market realms that are expanding in their space. Maybe they're high tech, maybe they are ICT, maybe it's agribusiness, whatever it is, and to think about how to prepare workers for those industries today and whatever scale they exist today, but also for the future, and to have a good strategy for national development that relates back to higher education. And there are broad implications for this, that human capital foundations are as important as they've ever been. And this emphasis on lifelong learning. And we're working strongly with institutions around the world to encourage them not just to think about traditional age cohorts, but actually what they can do to support continual learning through the lifetime of any individual. One of the big pressure points that's coming through this new world is the future of work being dominated by automation and innovation. And this is something that's going to have a huge impact on countries that have relied on manual labor and physical resources in their workers for sustainable labor market outcomes. And the US has already seen great political impacts by this change. This is going to expand around the world, obviously, and it's happening already, where there are lost employment in old sectors without reskilling. Those workers tend to be left behind, and it leads not just to economic instability, but also political and social instability. This is a chart that I think is just interesting about what's happened in developing countries, where the share of employment in high skill occupations has increased, but there's been some spaces where it's actually happened quite evenly. I'll send this presentation so that you all can have it at home. But in other spaces, there's been a great polarization between low skill and high skill. And what happens to those people who are left behind is where education systems have a real requirement to step in and provide the resources to support them. So, and I'm going to conclude, I've been talking too much, with just a snapshot of the World Bank's support for higher education in the global space and in Africa. Since 2015, between projects that were being implemented and projects in the pipeline, there's been about $10.7 billion of investment in higher education, all post-secondary education. And this includes lending projects. We also provide research and analytical supports, and this is for the globe. In terms of sub-Saharan Africa, the Africa region constitutes about 30% of our total education interventions globally, and 50% of the investments in higher education. There's been a huge push, largely through the African Centers of Excellence initiatives, but also through bilateral lending programs with countries around the continent to support higher education expansion. And I think some of the conversation, I've seen some of the questions from talks ahead of time about what we're doing and why. A lot of it is about preparing graduates for the future of work. So I look forward to that conversation. We've had 15 regional projects, all really focused on science, technology, and skills development, extensive country level initiatives. The product lines, as I said before, it's mostly lending, but we do a lot of technical and advisory work. And it's for Africa alone, it's been just about 5 billion. And so I close here with a quote from Kofi Annan, and it's a very significant, I think, a resonant driver for why we do what we do at the World Bank in the region. Because those of us who work in higher education spend our whole careers when we work in higher education for development, defending what higher education can do to support development. It does seem in many ways to be an elitist endeavor, but as I've said to my classes in the past, when I've had the luxury of teaching on side of my work, there are several reasons to support higher education as a tool for development. It is the consequential one, which is that if you don't do it, what happens? You lose your talent, people leave and don't come back. In many ways, the idea of brain circulation is an idealistic one, particularly in times of fiscal and economic constraints. But there's also sort of the positive of investing in higher education, which is that you get to do these things for your country at home and make a big difference on the ground every day. And this is where Kofi Annan's wisdom comes through, where he says the university must be a primary tool for Africa's development in the new century. Universities can help develop African expertise, enhance the analysis of African problems, strengthen domestic institutions, and serve as a model environment for the practice of good governance, conflict resolution, and respect for human rights, and enable African academics to play an active part in the global community of scholars. This is it's an ethos that underpins all that we do in higher education in the sub-Saharan Africa region, but truly for me, globally. This is why higher education, it's an international initiative, but it is a domestic driver, and it is something that we all need to commit to support the holistic and sustained development of our clients. And with that, I will turn it back over to Tokes.
Thank you, Roberta. Yeah, thank you so much for such a great picture of what's really going on in higher education globally, but particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, and really what our students are experiencing, understanding that they're not alone in this experience. So for a lot of them, for example, going through tertiary education and then coming out not finding jobs, and so really kind of putting that into global perspective and helping them to see that this is kind of occurring on a large scale. And then also, you know, what the possibilities are. So yeah, I really thank you for that presentation. We've all, I'm sure I can speak for the others, have learned a lot. So I'd like to just dive in a little bit to some of the specifics in terms of internship programs and things that you're seeing. So I know that you've spent, you know, a lot of years in administrative roles, you know, within higher education, including, you know, serving as dean at Stanford University. And I'm wondering whether you've seen any trends in particular industries that are providing internships. So you talked in your presentation about, you know, the agribusiness and automation potentially, but yeah, can you tell us about any trends that our students can think about getting into, any industries they can think about getting into, particularly in terms of looking for internships and a way to work?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you know, historically, higher education has not been great at providing avenues for internships. And this is true from the wealthiest countries to the least wealthy countries. It's something that higher education institutions actually often have resisted because of a sense that higher education is not meant to be preparation for the labor market. It is meant to create an educated human who then ventures into the world and becomes part of the entirety of the society, including as a laborer. You know, in the US, very much outside of career service centers, and I don't know how many people here have access to career service centers, you know, they're not often particularly useful. And there's certainly, especially for non-traditional avenues, especially as something that's out of the familiarity of the people who work there, and they tend to be relatively small staffed, and they tend to, you know, have, so the narrowness of what is offered at an institutional level is universal, even at very well resourced spaces. And I think for those of you who have gone to wealthy institutions everywhere in the world, you will have actually experienced that when you walk in and say, I want to do something a little off what's normal. I don't necessarily want to do an accounting internship or something where the apprenticeship model became a university degree program, but the apprentices parts still stayed kind of normal. For anything outside of that, it's very difficult. And individual students still to this day are the ones who drive this, the seeking of the internship. You know, even, you know, I went to Columbia University for first degree a million years ago, but my internships I sought from just, I thought it'd be interesting. So I went to, you know, went to the places and said, do you hire interns? And is there a way I can work here for free? I mean, that was me trying to do something else. That's not that different now. And so I think, you know, what Kunve is doing with this Nigerian initiative is just astonishing and super important for the region, because if it works as it's working and can grow, it can serve as a model that can be spread across the continent and truly across the world. Because I've worked a lot in East Asia, I've worked a lot in Europe and Central Asia, and internship programs also very, very unusual there. So very often they are student driven. I think in places like Stanford, and Stanford is, you know, such an outlier that's not particularly useful for a global conversation, but because so much of the employers in that environment, in the Silicon Valley environment, went to Stanford, know people at Stanford, have investors from the Valley, that it's a logical place to seek out people who would work there. But again, not so many internships. It's much more after your first degree, you just get a job, and, you know, maybe it's a low paying job, not so much low paying recently, but I think maybe now in the post-COVID world, the incomes won't be so great for first jobs. That's just going to be the reality. But one of the things that we are doing within the African Centers of Excellence initiative, which is supporting relationship building with the private sector in particular and the innovation sectors, is to encourage increased opportunities for master's and doctoral students to have some form of work-based learning through their studies. And this is challenging. It's challenging because of the lack of robustness in that space, the sort of the innovation space, the commercialization of research space. It's also because I think there's not a huge amount of trust yet in the connections between those spaces, that what you're going to get is someone who's going to commit to the work. What you're going to get from the employer, those who will supervise your internship, is that they're not going to steal your knowledge and your commitment and monetize it and not benefit you. I think the building of the trust is going to be significant in the years to come, and that organizations like this one will be super pivotal in that, because they facilitate a long-term dialogue. It becomes something that's sustained while the individuals change. There's a driver of a narrative that can keep that going and build trust over a long period. Globally, that's the challenge, but I also think globally that's the avenue to creating more robust internships or sort of early work opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can certainly testify to firsthand experience of just that, career services not being as helpful when you don't.
They want to be, they really want to be, but
it's really tough. And so, I will just echo what you said in terms of students. You need to go out there and be the driver of, what is the experience I want, and can I intern here, or can I get an experience there, and do what Sheshawa is doing, and be the driver of that internship program. Absolutely. So I wonder if you can, give me your opinion on what you think kind of needs to shift in higher education institutions in Africa at the moment. So what can the institutions really do in terms of, helping students be prepared for this future of work? I mean, short of, as you said, higher education institutions, they want to be higher education institutions, and they want to educate people and, create well-rounded, humans rather than job-specific robots, if you like. So what, short of doing that, what can higher institutions do, higher education institutions?
Well, one of the, the challenges, which I didn't bring up in my presentation, but one of the big challenges that we're seeing across the continent is actually the lack of younger academic staff, and the lack of sort of postgraduate degrees among academic staff. So staff that have achieved masters and PhDs are still quite low in number in the teaching of the first degree. So I would say, one of the big challenges, one of the things that we are supporting through a lot of our projects, not just the African Centers of Excellence initiatives, which are across the continent, but also through bilateral lending, is to encourage greater training of masters and PhDs and postdocs where possible, so that what is being taught is immediately relevant to the students and to the environment in which they will be trained and working. What happens, which is no knock on at all of older faculty members who've been there for a long time, but they tend not to have as immediate access to what's happening in the global space, or ask more critical modern questions, because they're embedded in their research. And also, there are just a lot of academic staff who are teaching with just a bachelor's degree. And so they're limited in what they can offer students as thinking beyond that basic knowledge. What other questions can you ask? What other space could you be researching? And how might that be something that can be commercialized to the benefit of you as an individual who wants to have, some commercial success, but also to your country, to the region, to become drivers of change and development that is sustainable over a long period of time. So I think at an institutional level, and they're already working, across the continent, it is just about having more and better trained academic staff at the earliest availability in their academic careers. And that also includes cross-regional study as well. So we do a lot of support for programs where someone from Tanzania can study in Rwanda or Ethiopia or Nigeria, to have this experience where you're building partnerships, they're building networks, they're building, this entire coalition of academic staff that are going to learn and develop for Africa, not to keep importing external models of education or external models of economic expectation, but for what is going to drive, indigenous growth and sustain that over the long term.
Absolutely. So students, I hope all of you are listening loud and clear, because that means that, as you're graduating, you also need to think about going into academia and being the young, professors and, and going back into teaching and really bringing that real world knowledge into the field of academia in our country. So do it at home.
Correct. Yes. All of my students, I've said that to them as well. Those of you who are on this call, I'm like, all of you should go get a PhD. You're brilliant. Get your PhDs and become the leaders for your countries, because they need you.
Absolutely. In fact, that connects nicely with something that Dr. Peter Blair was just speaking about. So right before our conversation, Peter had asked us to take 15 seconds to think about what can we wake up and do tomorrow, and really just, and I guess the point was that, look, we are also in control of where Africa goes and what this future of work and this future of Africa looks like. So right here, right now, think about what you're going to do tomorrow. And as you were talking, Roberta, one of the things I said is, oh, I'm going to go back to one of my old schools and talk to the students and say, look, this is what tertiary education, this is the importance of persisting in your education and seeing it, right the way through to the end. So I encourage, our other students who are listening to do the same. And
if I could just offer one more thought on this, and this is especially because of how many strong women are running the session today. In the post-COVID world, the impacts on girls actually of being excluded from schools in the last few months has been dramatic and will continue to be. We'll see lower levels of girls and women returning to their studies for all sorts of reasons. The data coming out now about pregnancies among under 19-year-olds across the continent is painful. And this is also going to impact the access for girls and women going forward to finishing their degrees, to being able to return if they were in a doctoral program over, in a different country, will they be able to go back? These are things, all of you women and advocates for women who are on this call today, if you do go back to your home communities and you are talking to students in primary and secondary school, really support the girls because women and girls are going to lift the continent as they've lifted countries around the world through numerous avenues of social and educational, economic growth. But more importantly, the plight of girls, the plight of those who are the most susceptible to the damage of these types of pandemics affects society as a whole. Your life is better when girls are better and when women have opportunity. So when you go back, really drive this discourse for girls and encourage them to continue to dream big, because it's going to be hard in the next few months, few years to bridge this gap, but it's going to be people like all of you who are able to do that and help them do that together.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Roberta, because it really is so important, and it's also related to one of the challenges I was going to ask you about, which is that, what can institutions do to ensure our students do come back? And now that, you've kind of taken it towards women, specifically women and girls, what can our institutions, particularly higher education institutions, do to support girls coming back to their studies?
Yeah, I mean, besides the obvious financial ones, right? Besides bridging whatever financial obligations they have to their families at home, and those are real, right? All of that is real. When their parents have lost their jobs, or when the informal sectors are diminished in their scale and the ability to work, those girls fill an important gap. Maybe it's childcare, maybe it's something else, but so the financial is obvious. I mean, that's obvious. A lot of it is emotional. There's a lot that happens in these contained periods. We're talking to our centers and institutions about the socioeconomic stresses that have been put on students and academic staff, being prepared to have resources to support that. Maybe they'll feel guilty coming back to school. Maybe they'll have obligations that put stresses on them, and they need to have support that helps back that up. That kind of support is important. I think too, we haven't talked about COVID. This wasn't the point of this, but the digital divide has been deeply exacerbated in this period, where those who left their campuses and went to homes that are part of the continent without internet access, and that is over 60% of the continent does not have internet access. What can you do if they can't return to campus to give the education to them where they are? And that isn't necessarily through online learning. It may be through mailing packets of printed materials. It may be through videotapes or CDs or really old school flash drives. But whatever it is, to be creative, to be innovative about how to do that until the capacity for genuine distance learning becomes more normal and more accessible on the continent. But it is thinking about on the ground, what is the experience of that woman? What is the experience of that girl? And what can you do for them with the resources you have without giving up on them?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Roberta. And I am so sorry that we've actually run out of time because
I talked too long.
No, not at all. It has been a fantastic conversation, and really all credit to you for also getting up early for us. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to let everyone know that if you are joining us on the YouTube live link, live feed, I've put some of the links to some of the things that Roberta was talking about in her presentation in the chat there. So the Africa Center for Excellence, project, and then the report, the higher education report that you spoke about from the World Bank. So some of those things are in there. I will continue to monitor that chat. So if you have questions, please just drop them in the chat, and we can try and direct you there. So yeah, I'd just like to take the last few seconds to just thank you once again, Roberta. I really, deepest gratitude to you for your wealth of experience that you've brought to this session, and making it so relevant for our students, both in terms of thinking about them where they are and making it Africa related, but also, COVID related, and, and these times. Yeah, thank you once again. So over to you, Kumbi.
All right, thank you so much, Roberta, for joining us today. That was so explosive. I really got a lot of information, especially about the work that World Bank is doing for Sub-Saharan Africa and what higher education can do. I think the most important part of this conversation is the practical steps, things that we must be realistic about, especially with our current realities. What exactly do we need to do to, push the conversations forward? What exactly also should our roles be as individuals who work on the continent, or who serve as leaders, or who are, aspiring leaders, especially because there's so many of them on this conversation. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. I really did enjoy it. And I'm sure that I speak for all the people who are listening. Thank you for sharing your wealth of experience with us. It was a short time, and for just showing up. We really do appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. I will always show up for you. And I see my students on the screen too. I'll show up for all of you. So I will send you my PowerPoint.
So
and so my email address is in the PowerPoint. So if anyone wants to contact me too, they can email. I'm not fast with responding, but I do eventually always respond. I promise.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye.
So we've run out. We are behind time, and I will still keep the time. So we're going to start at exactly 1 o'clock, which is in 4 minutes. And we're going to be having the next sessions in about 4 minutes. So I'm going to hand this over to Wura, who's going to take on the next session.
Thanks, Kumbi. And I'll just wait, like she said, for 4 minutes before we get started.
All right.
Ura, so good to see
you. Good to see you too.
So funny how we have to hijack these like Zoom conferences just to get to speak to each other.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, Mr. Totori. Hi. Thank
Don't
you.
worry, just to make it easier, you can just call me GT. You don't have to.
Okay, I'll go with that.
just to make it easier.
So
Do
I'll
I
get
start on my video now? Are we ready?
Yes, I'm about to get started.
Okay.
Sweet.
How you doing?
Doing very well. How are you?
I'm great as well.
Awesome. Great. So hello, everyone. Welcome back from the break. My name is Wara, and I'll be moderating our next discussion with Mr. Gbenga Totoyi, who I'll refer to as TT henceforth, on the future of work and what African youth must do. So first, I'll give a brief introduction about him and his background, and then I'll turn it over to him for his presentation. Mr. Totoyi is a partner at Allen and Grant Consulting. He's a management and HR consultant with a decade of consulting and practice experience, cutting across all major sectors of the Nigerian economy. He's also the Director of Membership and Market Development in the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management, CIPM. His passion and career interests lie in helping forward-looking organizations align their long-term corporate objectives with organizational capacity building initiatives. His specialties and areas of focus include integrated learning frameworks, which are delivered through corporate academies with an emphasis on blended learning, career management, and succession planning. Additionally, he specializes in leadership development and HR transformation. He's also passionate about coaching, mentoring, and providing workplace guidance to young professionals, and that's why we have him on our call today. So welcome again, Mr. TT, and thank you for being with us, and I'll turn it over to you now for your presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I joined in a lot earlier. I wanted to be a part of the program from the very beginning. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we hear you just fine.
Okay, cool. But for some reasons, I couldn't be a part of it from the very start. But please, my apologies. I joined in just during the last session, and that was extremely important. One of the things I'm passionate about, or I love to see, is whilst it's easier for Sheshewa, and then kudos to the entire team. You guys look awesome. It's like you've been doing this for 10 years or something. You all look cool and collected, and everything is okay, but you can't fool me, right? I know beneath all of this, there's been a lot of phone calls and chats and a lot of things going on behind the scenes. So kudos to you, the leader of the team, and the entire, bearing in mind you guys are also in different parts of the world. I thank God for technology, right? But when technology also wants to misbehave, it comes with all shit. So I have an idea what you guys are going through. I have the opportunity of planning the biggest conference for HR people in Africa, the CIPM conference, for the last 2 years, where you have about 2,800 to 3,000 people gathered in one place in Abuja, Nigeria. And trust me, they need the fun and the excitement. Some of us get to crash like after the day. So I have a clear idea of what you guys are doing. So kudos, right? Kudos. What I love about that session the most is, I was trying to say, for a while, I've done my bit in the space, talking to young people on all around enterprise and employability development. But at some point I figure, if we really want to see impact and true change, we need to start looking at scale. And there are a few things, a few platforms, all across the world that can get scale done outside of government and big institutions. And that's where educational institutions comes in. And in the last 5 years or so, I sort of like shifted my focus towards being part of policy and governance and working with institutions of government to, interestingly enough, collaborate with private sector organizations that have the scale required to do things that are possible. Sheshewa is great. Your model is great, but there's a limit to what you can get done compared to Sheshewa taking this model. So imagine if this conference that we're having now is, for instance, running on the Facebook platform, supported and endorsed by Facebook. The reach is just going to go boom. and then we are reaching maybe about 20 million Nigerians or 50 million Africans with ease. So I've always loved to see big institutions working with large corporates that have cross-border responsibilities around sensitive things that has in the development space, be it education, technology, health, and things like that. So very great presentation. I picked up a few things from there, okay? I'll try and make this as conversational as possible. I know you've got questions for me after about 30 minutes or so, but from experience, I don't like to do information dumping, right? Which sometimes we get to do when we teach. So I'll just talk for a few minutes, and then perhaps you can take up the questions from there. I'll let you know once it's. And again, I want to say thank you for having me. This means a lot to me. And I'll just share. Excuse me. I know I've been asked to talk about the future work and its implication for young. I've got a number of things opened up on my system. So, okay, great, got it. And to share what the implications are for young people and what we can begin to pay attention to as we adjust to these realities, right? Okay, just give me a second. Yeah, technology, right? I guess I shouldn't have mentioned technology when I started.
You spoke too
Just
soon.
give me a second. All right, I'll get that out of the way. It's very strange. Okay, I'll be talking about the future of work, but from a couple of years ago, I think about 3 years ago. So I stumbled on a model from the Boston Consulting Group that I mean, at the time when I was studying, I consider it was very rich. And I just felt each time I've been asked to talk about the future of work and implications for young people, I just like to talk from that standpoint because there's a lot to share from there. Okay, got it. Sorted, right? I believe you can see my screen now. All right, cool. Thank you so much. Right? So first off is, I think it's about time we stopped saying the future work. That word future sells us it gives us the illusion that things are okay. And it's not. My journey into this all future work thing started. I was think about that just it was like, oh wow, what's this? It was a report that was captioned top 70 paying jobs the year 2030. Top 70 paying jobs the year 2030. I like, okay, so I'll be on.
Mr. Gbenga, we can't hear you very well.
The high-paying bit got my attention. and I saw 2030, I was like, okay, great. Started paying attention to the year 20.
It seems your sound is going on and off. Maybe we can try. Maybe we can try again. Maybe to
Sorry, I'm back on.
Yes, okay, there we go.
Sorry, I'm back on. Don't worry, this won't happen again. And maybe I need to say my apologies to the entire tech world. So I'm sorry I mentioned technology. You guys are the best. So please give me a few, give us a couple more hours to get through this, right? It's raining in my part of Lagos, so that might also be affecting the network, but we'll be fine. And so I saw that and I was like, oh, wait, this is great. What this means is we've got a lot of work to do in the years ahead. And I just delved into it. I would not, in my presentation, I like to, yes, establish a few things that I think is critical about the future of work. But where I want to really focus on, and because that's what I think young people should, conversation around FOW, right? I'll just jump right into it. I love this quotes that I like to share each time I talk about. COVID-19 has only come to accelerate the adoption of technology and the changes that we're seeing with regards to the future of work. But beyond COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic, we are going to have, we are not going into any form of normalcy. I don't think businesses, the world, and governance are going to go back to where we used to be before COVID-19. So I always like to ask this question: would you wait for the future to happen or take a hand in shaping it? So for me, when I stumbled on that report many years ago, with my study in economics, I knew, well, 2030 is just around the corner. And it's amazing, 8 years on, we're just looking at a decade right in front of us. And the second thing I wanted to say here is that with everything that's going on around us and some of the things that we're hearing today and that we'll still hear in the weeks and months ahead, it's important that young people take responsibility to start implementing some of these things. See, for a conference like this, you're going to hear a ton of things. You're going to, you will hear some things again for the that you've heard before. You're going to hear maybe one or two things that are new. At the end of the day, you're going to get some change to your worldview and even the way we look at Africa and your relevance in the scheme of things. But what's critical is that you've got to stop doing a number of things and start doing something. And it may just be you pick up 2-3 things from today, but my advice is start doing it, take responsibility, and start driving some of these changes. Okay, and I'll just jump to just before I go there. So what we've seen is this. If you back up a little bit, maybe some of us listening today may not be around then. We had the boom of technology just before year 2000, right? And there was also a bust around the 1999 to 2001 period. A number of tech companies disappeared and a few other ones stayed, learned from the lessons of the generation before that. And then we saw a lot more products that just picked up from that time. So if you check around today and look at the big tech companies that we have around us, you will almost put them in that bracket of 1990 to 2000 and to max 2005, right? That's where we saw the birth of most of the tech companies that we have around us today. But what I figured out way back, at that time was, because some people still get it wrong. Some of us still look at technology as a support to business or as a support to living, or we see technology only from a development or coding standpoint. For me, this is the way I like to say it. Technology has become the business. Technology has become the way of life. Technology, and the moment technology has become that major platform to drive innovation and drive engagement and even change the way we live our lives. And how do I mean? And so if you take entertainment, for instance, for a long time, entertainment was defined by, growing up to watch TV, there was a particular time, there had limitations in terms of channels and things like that. And it affected my interaction or my experience of a desire that I had. This is what I think technology did. Technology came in to better understand to understand consumer needs and how it changes over time, and then use that need to create solutions in a way that is different from what we've always seen in traditional space. So the way we consume, I mean, some of us will struggle to remember how we watch TV, go to the cinema and things like that, and watch movies because of our interaction with Netflix and other platforms that share such content. There used to be a time when you couldn't have that. So between that time and now, the connecting factor is technology. But few things happen. Technology allowed us to, one, understand that, you know what, we have a generation that has come into, and this is why we should be excited as young people, because our desires and our demand for change or demand for something new and innovative and bespoke and customized and meeting our needs was what started that curiosity on the part of tech startups and founders who felt, you know what, even if I look at myself, so if you look at the guy the brain behind, I just lost the name now, this camera that a lot of sport people use in capturing moments, and I think it's GoPro, yeah, the guy behind GoPro. It was just a surfer, someone who loved sports and wanted to capture moments. He wanted to capture some moments better that he felt the traditional camera just couldn't do that. He took that need that he had, he looked around himself, particularly a generation around him, then to say, oh, people want to experience, people have experiences that they want to share in a different way or capture in a different way. There's got to be a different way for us to meet this need. And that was what informed the creation of that entire company. The same thing we see all around, from technology to health to all work, everything we do in life. There was a need that was different from what we used to have, and we demanded for a change in how that was met. What happened though afterwards was more and more companies started using technology to understand human needs and create products and services to meet those needs, right? And that was what started this whole movement, right? And started changing how organizations are designed, started changing and like I tell people, businesses are not set up to, I think it's deeper when we say businesses are set up to create customers than when we say businesses are set up to meet customer needs. Because what we've seen is that there are times when you don't even know what needs you have, or you're not aware of it until the company comes in your face, and your view rather, and say, we think you have this need, or we think you would rather have this need met this way. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's true. And then, hey, before you know, you're hooked, right? So that's what most of the tech companies have done. In some cases, created products and services that we never thought we needed or we had. And then fast forward, we become such addicts that we can't go away from such things. So, and if you look at the average organization, it's a collection of jobs designed to create products and services that customers need. I'll take that again. The average organization is a collection of different jobs interwoven, but all aimed at creating products and services that are aimed at meeting customer needs out there, right? So get it now, organizations changed because we had changing consumer needs and expectations. As the organizations changed, they used technology to meet those needs and create businesses to meet the needs. In being able to understand and keep up with those changing needs and aspirations of customers, they use technology more. What that means is, as we see changes with the organizations that create the products and services that we need to meet our needs, the jobs in those organizations also needed to change in order to track consumer needs and build products and services to meet those needs. And ultimately, the worker on those jobs needed to build new capabilities to meet those, to be able to perform the expectations required to create those products and services that customers. I hope I created that type very well. I get it all muddled up sometimes. You see, that's why technology will be with us forever. I jokingly say, for instance, that if you look at banks, banks used to be financial institutions using technology to sell banking products and services. But in recent years, perhaps the last 5-10 years, you would typically, I would say, a bank is a technology company selling banking products and services. There's a tiny switch in there that if you're not paying attention, you may not see it. And I've been jokingly telling people around that in some parts of the world, particularly Nigeria and Africa, as we go on, I think we are soon going to start seeing bank MDs as pure tech people. We're going to see pure technology people become bank MDs or leaders and CEOs of financial institutions than the traditional expectation that you must be a banker. Even if you look at other companies, health, sales, and things like that, and pharmaceuticals or production, as technology changes the way we are set up as organizations and changes the way we collect and interact with customers, we are going to see increasing need to have people with core technology backgrounds because they find it easier to understand the needs of customers and create the products and services. You get it now. So that's the real key here. And I'm saying that because sometimes when we talk about technology, people then only mention a part. So do I have to go code? Do I have to things? No. Technology in itself is become a capability. It's beyond you being able to, I don't know how to code, but I understand technology, right? And so for me, it comes to these three phrases. When we look at the changing, everything we're talking about, it comes to how the world of work, the worker and the workplace has changed, driven by technology, right? In fact, there's also a joke out there that the turn of the millennium, investment bankers on Wall Street and the likes missed out on the boom because they just couldn't value organizations that existed without a building, right? And I mean, fast forward now, we say we value organizations. When you're talking about this whole online space, you're looking at bricks and clicks, right? But there was a time when we only had to look at bricks. You have to go to work. But all that has changed because the workplace is no longer a location we go to get work done. Work has come home, right? In fact, with some of the things that I'm involved in at the CIPM end, in terms of regulation and policy change and all of that, we've had to start looking at, okay, you know what, so if you look at Employee Compensation Act, for instance, it suggests that if you have an injury in the course of work, you enjoy some form of compensation, right? What happens if I have that injury at home while at work? You get it? And in a way, the workplace, traditional workplace may have been set up to protect us. We have all the signs around, but to a number of us, our homes may, I mean, if you look around, our homes have not been published beyond the virtual banner that, don't worry, I'm not throwing shades at you. If I look at the beyond the virtual banner that you've got on, I'm sure, it's still your home as it were, it's not your office, but we live in a world now where the line that separates the two is so blurry that there are considerations we need to, pay attention to all around us, right? So, but this is the real change. The workplace is changing. In fact, there are platforms all around the world now. While some people are more comfortable with co-working spaces, we are now having spaces that combine co-living and co-working. Because we are seeing a trend where people increasingly want to live with people they work with and vice versa. So why don't we create solutions that allow you work and live in the same premises so you don't have to go out? And if a year or two ago we thought that was crazy, in a COVID in the world that we live in now and going forward, wouldn't we want this? Yeah, you get it right. Wouldn't we want a situation where, I'm in a 10-story building, my car is parked on the 2nd floor, my office is on the 5th floor, and my apartment is on the 7th floor, and then the roof of the building is an open playground with a garden and things like that. So I don't have to leave the building. Do you get what I'm trying to say? all that is premised on how technology has changed, but how that change is driving work, the worker and the workplace, and enabling us to do more and just driving that conversation going forward, okay? Now, what are the major forces influencing these changes that we see in the world of work, the worker and the workplace? One, again, I think I don't need to say it again, is technology, and we see it all around us. We may not have even considered this a year or two ago or 5 years ago. We were like, no, it's a conference. We need to be in one place and the speaker needs to be put in an hotel. We would not even have considered it, right? We would just not have considered it. A few weeks ago, some conversation happened, and then before I knew it, there's a request for me to be on a conference in Zimbabwe, speaking to HR people in Zimbabwe. I've always wanted to travel more to more countries in Africa, but a few years ago, I would still be thinking of actually going there. No one would actually be thinking, oh, you know what, we don't have to bring you. Let's just, connect and talk online. Even though we are doing this now, there are challenges around it, but we will surmount it. The next thing that's driving this major change is government, right? It's government. Government in terms of, so we're seeing some governments around the world adjust, entry requirements and change policies to attract young people. And just like the last speaker was saying, international education is big in Africa, huge. But going forward, that's going to be one area that will be hugely challenged, because all of a sudden, the travel restrictions, should it stay, should it go? In the last 2-3 years, as we look at Europe, we see different countries of the world pursuing some sort of independence and would rather not want to be a part of, a union or an association, because they figure, we have our peculiar needs, we have goals we want to pursue ourselves, and we don't want to be entangled in any way. All that will create policy changes that will influence the world of work. I personally followed Brexit for the 2 years plus that he ran for. And if you check towards the end of 2018, major corporations of the world that had their headquarters in London and the UK started moving to other parts of the world. France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Amsterdam, and were countries that benefited from that migration. Whilst the major organizations moved, what we perhaps didn't pay attention to was also the migration of talent, right? And that creates gaps, all around Europe and things like that. It will create opportunities. So government has got, we see different governments of the world using policies and programs and interventions, and that is affecting the world of work. Rapid urbanization, saying economic power shift. We see what's going on all around the world. Some countries of the world are all of a sudden saying, you know what, is America really the big brother of the world? Can't we have more options? And we see, if we look at Africa, since we are focusing on Africa, for instance, in the last 2 years, there's been greater focus from China. Russia has come along the way as well. Germany is waking up to, and all of a sudden France is also saying, you know what, if half of Africa speaks French, what competitive advantage do we have in the African continent as a country? So we're seeing a lot of that affect movement all over the world. And needless to say, young people are driving that conversation. We are more mobile, we are more adventurous, we want to see the world, we want to experience different culture, we have different tastes in different areas of our lives. And that demand, that need is driving a lot of the changes that we are seeing to the world of work. And then, I see there are other details in there that I wouldn't want to go into. Particularly in 2020, and looking at Africa, I put up some of this, the One Africa Free Trade Act. It's a major, major thing that African youth should pay attention to, because what this would mean, the immediate effect of this would be that talent mobility is going to be a big deal in Africa. As at the middle of last year, I think, or very early this year, about 22 African countries had signed up to the Trade Act already. And it's already affecting sectors like education, entertainment, hospitality, education as well. And I, for one, will ask a lot of my Nigerian friends, it's great to travel abroad, but abroad doesn't have to be Europe. there are opportunities in Zambia, Kenya, Zimbabwe, South Africa. And if you look at the entire map of Africa and you look at the growth of different industries, the maturity level is different from country to country. So for instance, if you look at Nigeria, what we've done with the financial service sector is still a miracle to a lot of countries in Africa. So much that, you know, institutions like Harvard and Co will say the depth of that transformation was so much, and the speed was something else that is become a case study in some, you know, higher institutions of learning. And what that means is the average banker in Nigeria would have an edge going to any other African country who perhaps is just starting their own transformation from a financial service sector standpoint, right? And we see that happening already. There are other parts of Africa that are ahead of Nigeria when it comes to, for instance, insurance, mobile money in Kenya. And so we can borrow from there. And you need to pay attention as you know, we see different things happening. Of course, I won't want to draw so much on that. US presidential election changed the world and was going to influence conversations in 2020. And we see that already, right, all around us. Industry competition, you just look around. Organizations like Dangote, UBA, and a few other ones have this big Africa vision, and that is driving their growth and their expansion. And that, like I said earlier, is also influencing the changes that we are seeing to the world of work, the worker, and the workplace, particularly for the African youth. I need to say this at this point. When we say the African youth, we are not only talking about young people living in Africa, but we are talking about African young people that are of African origin that are outside of Africa. There are opportunities that are, you know, being specifically created for people like that to perhaps return home and things like that. And we have economic activity in different countries that is also influencing that. I put up this because it's something I realized, even going by what I do in the recruitment space and talking to different organizations. So we're also seeing, and I'm particular about this slide because I think one of the errors I see in the space is where we are telling every young people to just go have digital related jobs. That's not balanced. There are still jobs that are outside of the digital environment. There are still opportunities in agriculture and education. So I loved what Roberts, right? I love what she said in our last session, where she was saying, hey, we are seeing there's a huge need for younger professors and doctors in the university environment, but we don't talk about these things a lot, right? Because there's an error in the space where we are saying, no, just go build digital skills or get digital jobs. So if you look at it, people who were on the track in agriculture and pharmacy, in arts and things like that, are dumping those career paths all in chase of digital jobs or in code tech jobs, right? There should be a balance there. These are other jobs that we are seeing all around us, of course, technology, but there are other areas in that technology value chain, product design, product management, and things like that are areas we all don't have to code. And I'm not saying that with any apologies. We all don't have to code. But do we all need to embrace technology? And technology is not digital. The technology skills are digital skills. There's a thin line that separates it, but some people erroneously just, they hear digital and then just go digital marketing. And I'm like, guy, no, there are other things to focus on, right? What I've also seen in my experience in recent years is that there is a demand for younger C-level executives. CEOs, MDs of organizations are becoming younger. You know why that is? Organizations have all of a sudden, like I said earlier, businesses exist to create customers. And the band of customers that is having it's amazing, guys. This excites me. I can have a whole day session on it, on changing customer taste and aspiration driven by young people. So the smart businesses are setting up innovation units, are changing their staff, are saying, you know what, we need to understand millennials more, we need to understand these Gen Zs more, because they represent our market the next 10, 20, 30 years. And so the forward-thinking organizations are setting up research platforms to understand what young people want. Those who are not paying attention are saying young people are not serious, they live their lives online, they're always on social media. The smart forward-thinking organizations are saying, what are they looking for? Without mentioning name, there's an organization in this country that I will always almost talk about. They're smart, very smart guys. A few years ago, almost a decade ago, they went to the Nigerian universities and asked the average Nigerian student to open bank accounts for free. Whilst their counterparts were telling, no, don't say that. While their counterparts were giving you, you must save with a particular amount and all that, they went into all Nigerian universities telling them, don't worry, no, just open an account, it's easy and it's free, you don't have to pay a thing. 10 years, 15 years on, it's become such a habit. In fact, if you're having some financial transactions with a friend and you're like, oh, give me your bank account, and they're calling some other bank, you're like, oh, really? You don't have this bank account, right? Why? And if you look back again, what they did at such times is to ask this essential question. Where are young people? They are online. What are they doing? They're either hustling or looking for entertainment. And this bank then created 2 separate platforms to support young entrepreneurship and support young people involved in entertainment. You can go figure out the rest and put the pieces together, right? They are not sponsoring this program, so I'm not going to make it. Right?
No. But that's absolutely important. The point that you bring up, I hate to interject here, but we have about 10 minutes for questions. And so I'd like to, turn it over to ask some of the questions that our attendees had asked ahead of time.
I warned you, right? I warned you earlier. I can get caught up in it.
No, you're clearly passionate about this, but you brought up the point of youth now being in positions to drive and to lead organizations and to be executives. And also the world is our oyster. So we have global opportunities. As an HR specialist, how do you encourage adults to position themselves in a way that they can take these roles and they can reach these opportunities? How do they find them and how do they have access to them? And also prepare themselves for leadership roles? What advice do you give?
First off, young people, please don't have entitlement mentality. Don't become all entitled. This sensitive businesses won't just pack up and hand you over a $10 billion company. You probably can't handle it, right? And we will still have traditional businesses in production, in agri, and things like that, right? So first off is young people. There are opportunities in traditional sectors and businesses. Open your eyes to those areas, right? Agri is still a big deal. Africa is still hungry. And for me, Africa is a country, not a continent. If you say Africa is a continent, you get deceived. Just look at the entire GDP size. I'm serious. Look at the GDP size of the whole of Africa and look at the population size of the whole of Africa. The budget of Apple, Facebook, and Google, I'm sure, is more than the budget of the entire government of Africa put together. I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. I know we are live online on YouTube, I'm sure, right? So Africa is not that big. So Africa is a country, to be honest. The other thing I would say is young people should, create that tie. If businesses are trying to understand young people, then young people should come with the skills and the answers that businesses are looking for. So the average business is looking for innovation, agility, understanding consumer behavior, business analysis. Those are skills that we need to go develop. In addition to grit and agility and lead project management, move to program management, the ability to run multiple projects concurrently. Those are high level, like I said earlier. So let me jump to something. There are technology skills, but there are business skills that we all need to begin to develop, right? Next question, and then I can use my slides to answer as many.
Sure. Okay. So you also mentioned in your time just now, you mentioned skills and the agriculture industry. And so I know we talk a lot about technology, and you've mentioned how technology is the new business. But for individuals who maybe don't have the interest or maybe don't have the access to technology, what is your projection for the skills industry in Africa, given that we often lag behind in technology?
Oh, I beg to differ. To a very large extent, I beg to differ. So the interesting thing is, we may be the first to consume technology in Africa. We may be ahead in terms of consumption, but we're also not doing badly in terms of being the people behind the work. I've had the opportunity to be in Europe and see, some of the best developers and designers in some of these top companies are Nigerians and Africans. I like to say that, right? So we are encouraged. Number two that I like to stress, which forgive me that I lost that in my flow of thought. I used to, when I talk about, I used to just refer to competencies, right? As you need to go learn competencies as you prepare for the future of work. But a few years ago, I stumbled on this model and it's amazing. So because the demands of organizations are changing, we also need to start changing what capabilities are called. Because we now require new capabilities to be able to adapt to the changing demands of the industries and the organizations we want to work for. And they are best captured in this 4 model, right? Competencies are direct. Okay, I go to school, I acquire a knowledge area. So I studied accounting, so you have the K. But you must apply that knowledge, which gives you the skill. And if you apply it over time, it changes your behavior, right? Which is competencies. But these other 3 areas are critical. You must then develop, you must pick up capabilities, technology capabilities that are around the 2. So I'm a numbers person. I studied maths and statistics. But you should pick up capabilities in Power BI and keep up capabilities so you know numbers, but if you're only, you get better with your competence around numbers if you can use the appropriate tool and technology to make that work. So you're a numbers person, you can conjure on the board, go pick up Power BI. You are a customer experience person, go pick up a CRM tool.
It seems we've lost your sound. I don't know if you're still here.
Yeah, I'm trying to say that, right? Okay. But also learn to be able to work in a place that is process. Yes, boring sometimes, but we still have to be outcome focused in your thought, find capabilities. And you should make sure you are picking up lessons along those areas. Go on.
Awesome. It sounds like you're just talking about like interdisciplinary skills, because you're a numbers person, you don't restrict yourself to that field. And so as we wrap up with our time coming to a close, I have a few more questions that I'll try and put together in one.
I'll be quicker in my answer, don't worry.
Oh, no, it's great. So with so in terms of gathering these interdisciplinary skills, and we've heard the importance of higher education, you're talking a little bit more about building yourself as an individual. How do you advise young individuals in terms of how they make the decisions on what to do next? You say start doing something, but what does start doing something like? Is it entrepreneurship? Is it pursuing jobs in corporate industry? Is it going back to higher education, or how can they do all of them together?
So our journeys are different, right? And when questions like this, when I'm asked questions like this, I run away from it because I try not to be prescriptive. I mean, quite a number of people are listening to me now, and I don't know your journeys. I don't know what you have. I don't know where you're going. One thing is clear. I think what technology does is, or what has happened to the disruption of the world of work, because it's also a lie when we say technology is taking away your jobs. No. Some jobs have gone into extinction, but technology, and there are research, we have research results to validate that there are more jobs today, more meaningful jobs, more high-paying jobs than we had before. What is happening though is that there is demand for peculiar technology skills that people don't have, or business skills that people don't have. So my answer will be take your journey, and from where you're coming and where you're going, and pick up 2-3 skills. Don't take on too much. You take an assessment to know what your gaps are and take up 1 or 2 skills. For instance, I used to run away from Excel. I'm still not as great as it with it, but this is what I advise young people. Don't jump to the other end and say, I want to go learn Power BI when your Excel skills is still whack. So tell yourself you want to get better with numbers and being able to do, maybe go as far as being able to make business analysis. Give yourself a 2-year plan. You are aiming for Power BI and business analysis, but go pick up Excel. Grow your competence in that. And then by the time you're going to year 2, you will see learning opportunities here and there to then start picking up Power BI. You can't make sense of a Power BI class or capability if your background in Excel isn't great. You got it? That would be my advice for you.
I appreciate that. It sounds like, there's stages to this progression that we're looking at. So
pace your learning, pace your growth.
Yes.
Our capabilities are also not the same in terms of access to technology, access to money and support systems and all of that. So sometimes we end up giving people a guilt trip or just give people performance anxiety. Some don't even have laptops yet, right? But they have a phone, so start with your phone. If you have got a laptop, use your laptop. If you don't have a library in your environment, go borrow a book. If you can't buy a book, go borrow. If you don't have any books around you, drag one person on your street who's got a career. If you don't have access to internet or whatever, there's got to be a place based on your own reality that you can start from.
Awesome, I love that. And I guess in conclusion, before we take a break and begin our next session, so in conclusion, I'd just like to ask, you've said a lot of exciting things, and what I took away from this is technology isn't taking away from my future and from my job. But so I guess what excites you about the future, and what things are you seeing that you will encourage we young Africans in?
I'm young as well.
Well, all of us then, about the future.
The future, what excites me the most is how huge the opportunities are. And wherever it is you are in any parts of Africa, you can start where you are with what you have. GT all over the place. People call my name and all, but this is not where I started from. I'm happy I started small. I had people in front of me, but that's the thing. I started and I haven't stopped. I jokingly tell people I'm a shameless learner. Shameless learner. So start with where you are with what you have and continue to learn as you go. Okay.
Awesome, that was great. And we're scheduled for a 10-minute break now, but I'll just, I guess, try and wrap up summarize some of the points that you made, which include, picking a few skills, honing on those skills, staging your career growth and projection, starting
measured
where you
growth,
just learning.
Measured growth, measured growth.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I believe I speak on behalf of Kumbi and everybody else.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We can continue the conversation online. My name is Benga Titui, anywhere and everywhere. We can continue there. Okay. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Yeah. So please, before you go, I really just have to say thank you for coming. That was really mind-blowing. It was extremely practical for especially the young people who are thinking about this future of work and what exactly do I need to do. You calmed a lot of nerves, I must say, and I'm sure that I speak.
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, for those young people who, you know how it is, especially if you're on social media, especially from companies like us, who understand how crazy these realities are. Sometimes I feel we are bombarding young people with this. You can't, and I totally can relate to that.
Please, young people, go watch a movie, calm down, live your life, go play football, have fun. Don't read all the time, don't be online all the time. Pace yourself. Yeah, you would. I mean, the journey, it's not about where you're going at the end of the day, because you get there and you will hate yourself to have missed out on the fun of the journey. Pace yourself. You didn't start Shishewa the first day it came to your mind. There was a process to it, and today you're here. Anyone looking at you now wanting to do a conference like this tomorrow will get it wrong. It's been 2, 3, 4, 5 years of learning. So please enjoy the moment, enjoy where you are and you wait where you're going, and make the most of it. Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. You've said it so well. So there's a lot of conversation happening on Twitter as well as on Instagram. You can follow us.
Oh, really?
Yes, you can follow us.
I'll try and follow.
Yeah. Yes, please follow at Benga Totoyi. Yes, GBENGATOTOYI on Twitter, as well as on all the social media platforms. You can follow our work, this conversation at Shishewa on Twitter, on Instagram at Shishewa Nigeria. We need people to know what you're learning in the conference. So would like to see your tweets, would like to say, if we are doing a good job, because I've seen a lot of conversations. We're not able to open the chat room here because we just didn't want to be bombarded with so much conversations happening here, so that we are concentrated on the conference. However, on the YouTube channel, which is Shishewa Nigeria on YouTube, you will be able to, we have a lot of people who are giving us feedback about how the sessions are going
Oh,
and
great.
all of that
Great.
information. So you could also leave us a comment there.
I'll
or if
try
you
and
have a
chime in at
question.
some point. I know I have to run off now.
No problem. No
Thank
problem at
you
all.
so much.
Thank you so much for coming once again.
My pleasure.
Yeah, yeah. So
Right.
before we go on the break, there's I just wanted to whet our appetite for the last session, which has, you know, I call them my, you know, in my mind, they are like my Powerpuff Girls. You know, they are my power women who are going to literally shake up this whole conversation because they work directly with government and they are going to be as practical as it gets. Ukinebo Dare, who is the managing director of Edo Jobs, she's also, people may not know, she was the CEO of Postgraduate Finishing School before she went to do that job. She's my role model in every ways that I can imagine, as well as Abosede Alime, who works with strategy for the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund. So I'm excited to have that conversation and excited to have my Powerpuff Girls or women on this conversation. So that will be coming up in 10 minutes from now. And it promises to be so exciting. I'm so excited to have that conversation. Then I think I'll change my mind about opening up the chat room here, but I will think about it. So would look forward to seeing you. Wura is going to take us up for the last session as well. Thank you so much for the excellent moderating as well. I really enjoyed how you brought in the conversations and how you spoke for so many people. Thank you so much. We're going to meet at exactly 3 p.m. Nigerian time. Hello?
Just a second. I think I'm okay. I think I
Yay!
should. Woo.
Oh,
Well,
so amazing. You're at work. God, do you sleep?
of course. What can I do?
Oh my God. Oh my God. I've been looking forward to your session. Bossa is also here as well. I think
Doing all the sessions so far. Wow, nice.
yeah, amazing. When did you get in?
About 2 hours ago. So I heard the last two speakers.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah. Let me make you the co-host because of your slide.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, and Bossa as well. I've been looking forward to your session, honestly, because I know.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're in a short break. We're going to be back in maybe 7 minutes, and then you're going to, bring it all in for us.
Okay.
So yeah.
Hello, ladies.
Hi.
Hi. Let me turn my video on so you can see. Hey. I literally just had a meeting and I ran here.
Oh
and
my God.
And literally, I'm just trying to put powder on my face.
Oh, that's so fun. I've been telling everybody about you guys showing up. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, ready.
Hi, Bossa.
Hi, Yuki. How are you? And how are you keeping?
Fine, thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hi, Wura. Good to be seeing you.
Hi, good to finally meet you. Hi, Uki.
Same here. And Kumbi, good to see your face as well.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we're on a short break. We'll be, yeah, you'll be ready to go at exactly 3 p.m.
Okay, awesome. So in terms
Yeah, I
of
hope you've
format,
been enjoying
Laura,
the session.
How many minutes do we have again? Sorry.
come again.
Yeah, go on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're interrupting each other. Sorry, boss, go ahead. Let you be done with your
No. I was
question.
just asking about the format of the session. I know Ura had sent it, but just to get a sense.
Yeah, so I'll introduce both of you, and I think we'll start with Uki's presentation, go to yours, and then we'll do some Q&As.
All right, awesome, sounds good.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say 3 p.m. Nigerian time? It's 2 p.m. actually. 2 p.m. Sorry.
Okay, about how many minutes do we? Okay, 20 minutes for our presentations, right? Each person. Okay.
Yep. All right, it is 2 p.m. on the dot. And so I'd like to welcome everybody back to this conversation we're having on the future of work. My name is Wora, and I'll be moderating our next and final discussion with Ms. Uki Nebodare and Ms. Abosede George Oga on the future of work and the role of government and the private sector. First, I'll introduce our two speakers, and then we'll first hear from Ms. Dare's presentation, followed by Ms. Oga's presentation, and then we'll turn to some question and answer session. Ms. Dare is the Managing Director of Edo Jobs, which is an initiative of the Edo State government to increase economic welfare. She also oversees the operation of the Edo Initiatives and the Edo Food and Agricultural Cluster and the Edo Production Center. She's passionate about people development, which includes youth engagement, employment, and job creation. She's also passionate about finding practical solutions to challenging problems in society through problem-solving, creative thinking, and by leveraging multi-sectoral collaboration. She has extensive experience in independently managing large projects on skills development and job creation for youth across Africa. She is responsible for the complete oversight of the design, planning, scoping, budgeting, scheduling, and sustainability of all of her projects. She has worked in the private sector, civil society, and government, and has implemented programs which have impacted over 100,000 individuals, including business executives, entrepreneurs, job seekers across multiple disciplines, industries, and countries. Thank you for being with us today. Ms. Oga is the Director of Strategy Funding and Stakeholder Management at the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund. She's an experienced tri-sector leader with a demonstrated history of working in the nonprofit, private, and public sectors. She's highly skilled in development communications, corporate social responsibility, and sustainability, through which she employs her strong analytical skills, team building, and interpersonal skills. She possesses over 15 years of development experience following a degree in political science and public administration and a master's in communication for innovation and development from the University of Reading. Prior to her current positions, she has worked with Samsung Electronics, African Alliance Capital, First Bank of Nigeria, and the Global Youth Action Network. So welcome you both and thank you for being with us today. I'd now like to turn it over to you, Ms. Uki, for your presentation. I believe she might be setting up now. Okay, please let us know when you're ready to start the presentation.
Would you like Abosede to go first, just since
Sure.
we're still in the UK? Yeah.
So yes, you can go first. We'd like to start with your presentation. Yes.
Okay. So first of all, let me say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining in from. And thank you to Kumbi and the Sheshewa team for putting this together and for having me here. And thank you very much, Wura, for making this process much easier. So as you've heard, my name is Abosede, and I currently work as part of a team that's creating jobs in Africa's largest city, which is Lagos in Nigeria. And I think that this is a really, really important conversation that we're having. I joined Professor Blair's sort of presentation this morning, and I think that he left us with a call to action to say that, look, young people rise, and what are we going to do? And I really liked the idea of not just thinking that this whole future of work and technology is for the, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be technology coming from sort of like the developed countries and us contextualizing for our use, but the fact that we can provide African solutions to global problems. And I think that that's amazing. So in the context of the work that we've been doing, if you know anything about Lagos, it is the largest city by population, but it's also a very diverse city. So typically, we have the last set of records that we have 85 people arriving in Lagos daily to make it their home. 85 people arriving in Lagos daily to make it their home. And as with sort of, migration outside the country, when you think about sort of internal migration, people are looking for a better life when they do come, from other parts of the country to Lagos, right? And so when the government of Lagos wanted to address this problem, it was very important to them that, look, what are the challenges? So there are a few challenges, right? A lot of small businesses, of which Lagos is home to 3 million small businesses, right? They struggle with access to finance. So not just accessibility, but also affordability of finance. So that's the one thing. The second thing is we do have a young population, and everybody talks about that as an asset, which it is. But the question is, are these young people employable, right? And I know that that's a conversation that we've been having today. So are they employable? Do they have the right skills, right, for the jobs that are in demand? So that was another gap that the government was seeking to address. And I think the final piece was really, look, how can we accelerate, job creation potentials, right? And how can we, be a catalyst to really move the needle? And within that was really innovation, right? So how do we foster innovation in an ecosystem that was already known as the leading ecosystem in Africa, to be honest, when you think about Iyabakon, right? So so LSETF is an agency, and I've been here since the start of it in 2016. What we needed to think about was, what are the best ways to really tackle these challenges that we have identified? And so we came up with 3 core intervention areas, right? So the first one, when you look at our first program, which is focused on providing access to finance, the theory of change is very simple. The theory of change is, look, if we provide access to affordable finance for small businesses, then they have the opportunity to, for example, sustain themselves if you were a dying business, or if you were a business that was doing well, you could expand, you could grow, and that means you would need to hire more people. So that's the theory of change there, right? And so I'll talk a bit more about how we do that. But the other piece is, if we're able to train young people with the relevant skills, right? So because it's not just about being trained, right? And I'm sure that somewhere here we've had a conversation about education and the role that it plays, in terms of skills. But it's not just about having a skill, it's about, do you have a skill that's in demand, right? So our theory of change with our employability program is the fact that, look, we wanted to train people to be able to actually get jobs, right? So thinking about the sort of demand and supply of work, right? Do you have the relevant skills? Because they're oftentimes always jobs, right? So that was that piece. And then the final piece is, they're young people in this city, right? With bright ideas every day. They obviously are first early adopters when it comes to technology, right? And so what enabling environment exists, right, for them to be able to take that idea, leverage the technology, and come up with technology startups that will be unicorns, right? And so really, that was sort of the theory of change across these different delivery mechanisms. And so for the loan program, what was important was affordability. So with what we do for our loan programs today, these loans go for 5% per annum, which is the cheapest you'll find in the country, because typically commercial banks don't even lend to this category of people. The commercial banks will categorize these people as high risk, right? So the risk premium that they will place on them does not even allow them to, properly serve them, if you know what I mean. So it was very important to us that we actually address that. And so that was the first piece around affordability. And then obviously bureaucracy sometimes makes accessibility a challenge. So it was very important to us that not just is this finance affordable, but it's also accessible. And let me tell you, look, Lagos is a very diverse city. So we're talking about people who speak English, people who do not speak English, people who communicate in Yoruba, which is, Lagos like official language, and people who speak Pidgin. So it was very important to us that, look, even though all of our applications eventually end up online, there are actually other ways that people can apply. So we have representation in all the 20 local government areas of Lagos, for example. And so you can walk into one of our liaison offices and said you wanted to apply. You could even be somebody who's not English speaking, and you would find somebody there who's able to serve you. So accessibility and affordability is very important. Now, if you're able to go through the process, which is a very simple process, right? So it's a simple form. It's you having a valid ID. It's you having evidence that you live in Lagos, because this is taxpayers' money in Lagos. And so it's important that it's for Lagos residents, right? So once you're able to go through that process and you get the money disbursed to you, what we like to say is that you become, become partners now, because we don't just want to give you money and let you go away. So beyond access to finance, we actually invested in providing access to capacity for these small businesses. And what our impact assessment showed is that 70% of our small businesses actually said they've never attended formal training. In terms of how much we give, these are not large amounts. So we're not dealing with your typical small business sizes. We give a maximum of 5 million naira. In today's dollar rate, I know that's higher, but it's somewhere around $12,000 as a maximum. But you can get lower than that, because to be honest, not everybody needs that much, right? But we also build capacity. And as I said, 70% of our businesses had never been in any formal business training. So definitely value add. And then the final piece is that, look, we also go out of our way to provide access to markets. And that's because we know that, look, this is a loan, even though it's at 5%, which is very minimal. We want that money to actually come back so that there's more money for the next batch of people who want to benefit. So we operate a revolving fund, if you know what I mean. And so when that, when you're now a beneficiary, whether it's through the public procurement system, now typically your small businesses are not able to participate in the public procurement system because these are huge contracts, these are huge deals. However, we educate them about the fact that, look, you can come together as a cluster, you can come together, as one unit, and then there are smaller ways that you can benefit. So we've gone out of our way to ensure that, look, all the ministries, departments, and agencies in Lagos State know our beneficiaries, know the services they offer, know the products that they have. And so if those are things that you typically buy or services that you typically use, then here's a list of people that you should be patronizing. And it also starts with us. So except we don't have a beneficiary, most of the things that we also use is done, with our beneficiaries. So that's the access to market piece is so important. So there's obviously public sector, there's private sector. The challenge with private sector though is fitting a small business into a private sector value chain. The major challenge is always around standards, right? Because a lot of these large businesses have certain standards, right? And so that's usually the challenge, but work in progress. And then the final piece is really export. So we've worked with a few of our businesses to understand, their capacity and readiness to export and to help them get, from the point where they are to actually being export ready. So that's the work we do. And then the larger framework of supporting businesses is the enabling environment, because for businesses to thrive, they need an enabling policy environment. So we do some work around understanding what that environment should be, and obviously feeding that back to the government. So we play a very critical role in being that intermediary. But what's the point of all of this, to be honest? The point of all of this is that we want those businesses to be sustainable so that they can create jobs. Right, so that's the whole point of this, right? And then also we want those businesses to also be better. So when I start to think about the future of work, you want because think about it, if you have people who have all these amazing skills, but then there are no businesses for them to sort of apply those skills, then there'll be a mismatch, right? So if you think about developed countries, a lot of people want to go and work in startups. the impression over here is not great when it comes to startups, because people just feel they can't pay, so they will probably not be able to pay me what I want. So we need to be able to change that narrative, and that can only happen when a small business, is very strong and stable, and they're able to grow. And so people can see that trajectory and they feel more comfortable to participate or to want to contribute in a small business. So that's the piece around access to finance. So let's move over to the work that we do around skills training. So the first thing that we did was we tried to understand what is the Lagos ecosystem like, right? So Lagos, we know Lagos is a city that's, tourism when it comes to Nigeria. So it's #1 commercial capital of the country. So we kind of said, what are some of the sectors, right, that are going to keep creating jobs? So you think about construction, think about healthcare, right? Think about entertainment. Before COVID, tourism was a big one, right? And hospitality. And, to be honest, I don't see that it's all gone. I just think that that's one industry that needs to pivot. And I'm hoping that we can do that quickly. But so we looked at and mapped out those sectors. Garment manufacturing was a big one as well. And we said, so what are some of these trades within these sectors that people are constantly looking for people? So I'll give you an example. If you live in Lagos, if you've ever lived in Lagos, people are always looking for tailors. It's just what it is. It's the truth. It's either people are leaving or people are joining, right? So the question is, it's fair to say that there's always a tailoring job. And then the question is, do you have the skills, right? So we identified specific trades like that across entertainment, across tourism, across manufacturing, construction. And we got like best in class curriculum development, which we did in partnership with industry, because look, there's no point training these people and the industry is not willing to take them because they don't believe that they've been trained in line with, the ideal standards, right? So consultation with industry, we agreed on the specific trade and we started to train. So it is easier that way for us to go back to industry to say, we've trained these people using the curriculum that you agreed, now hire them. Right? So that's the one piece. Now, what we found is, especially under the entertainment sector. So for entertainment, we train in things like social media manager, community manager, but also video production, sound engineer. And we found that those group of people tend to want to be freelancers, right? So, we don't find as much uptake when it comes to paid employment as we do with that category of people wanting to go into self-employment, right? So these are some of the interesting things that we've learned along the way. And so beginning to think about, why don't you have 2 tracks off the bat where you say, look, if you go through this training, you can either be self-employed or you could go into paid employment. So that's something that we've seen. And then, so the final piece of that is our innovation program. And it's kind of linked to employability. So what we've also found is our employability program is now feeding into our loan program. So our small businesses now have a pool of talent that they can also hire from, right? So everything kind of links together. And then the final piece around innovation, what we do is very simple around innovation. And this was based off of research, actually going out and saying, what do you guys need? And so we provide a workspace voucher program. So very simple. You've got an idea, you need data, you need electricity, you need a place to work, and then you need a community of people who can support you to develop that idea, right? And so we give out workspace vouchers, right? And those workspace vouchers help you, right, to actually go into one of these workspaces. All of the research shows that people who are part of those workspaces, especially for community, tend to do better. And a lot of these businesses also say, look, the money I would have used to rent, when I came into that money, I've used it to hire another engineer. And so it kind of accelerates how quickly they're able to get to seed funding or whatever it is, right? And then the final piece of that program is, look, one of the things that we've realized is that there is now, there's now talents being lost with technology because it's being exported, right? Because that's an option. But we recognize that there's no pipeline of talent. So now we do like a skills training, but focused on technology skills to be able to serve the small technology businesses that are also starting in the Lagos ecosystem. So we now train for real tech skills, and that is designed as a student loan program. So where our other programs are grants based in terms of our training programs, because technology skills are expensive, typically, we would give you a loan, but you do not start to pay back until you get into a job, right? So this is kind of like what our program looks like. And just because I can see time is almost up, in summary, we have supported 11,000 plus small businesses. We've trained over 5,000 young people, of which over 50% of those are placed in jobs. But then, like I said, we've got another 20% who have gone into sort of self-employment. And then with Lagos Innovates, we have supported 117 technology startup businesses with our workspace voucher, but we also give loans to the technology hubs as well. If they needed to expand, because we don't want them to run out of space to be able to serve our people. Yeah, so this is a summary of the work that we've been doing. In terms of the future of work, I think that what we're doing is basically adapting our skills and seeing what people need, especially with all of the things that are changing now. Because the priority for us and what success looks like is job creation, and we always say that.
Thank you for that very rich and extensive presentation. It was like the intersection between what the youth themselves can do, what the government is doing, in a way, what higher education institutions can do. And I think anybody who's listening in today can take something away from that. So before we move into question and answer, we'll turn it now to Uki for her presentation. Uki, I think your microphone is mute.
Thank you very much. That was nice. It's always nice speaking after LACTF because we are in very similar fields, so it makes my life a little easier. Yeah, so I'm just going to talk very briefly about what we do and then go into talk about what I feel government should be doing and private sector should be doing. So the Edo State Skills Development Agency, we are popularly called Edo Jobs. We were set up because the governor promised to create 200,000 jobs in 4 years. So this heavy load was put within, we were saddled with carrying that heavy load. So within the Edo State Skills Development Agency, we have loads of initiatives. We have Edo Jobs. Edo Jobs is where we do our job matching, employability training, skill acquisition programs, and entrepreneurship programs. So we train people and help them to get jobs or start their businesses. And I mean, very simple terms. We have the Edo Production Center where we work with artisans and small scale manufacturers. We give them a location to work with constant power supply. We all know that power is one major issue for production in Nigeria. Constant power supply, the Bank of Industry has an office in there so they can get access to loans and all of those things. We also have Edo Innovates, sister to Lagos Innovates. And then what we do at Edo Innovates is technology and innovation, working with startups, working with people that have tech business ideas so that they can get their business going. But more importantly, also training young people on things in skills like data science, artificial intelligence, simple things like laptop and mobile phone repair, all different tech skills that they can use to make better lives for themselves, but also that they can use to support existing businesses so that those businesses can come forward into the future, because we're already in the future. And then we have the Creative Hub that does something very similar for businesses in the entertainment sector. We do different projects in partnership with the private sector to help the entertainment industry in Edo State to provide the same kind of talent and the same kind of content that we get outside, I mean, in places like Lagos. Okay. Then we have the Edo Helpline, which is our new baby because of COVID. We have a helpline where we handle the emergency helpline, and that is helping us also go into a new area of job creation, which is setting up a commercial call center that will serve various businesses and then help us to get more people employed into the helpline. And then we have our projects, similar kind of model, working with farmers, connecting them to aggregators, connecting them to training inputs. You know, one major thing we found that when we talk, especially now that we're talking about the future, because of all the food bank programs, food donation programs, everybody's stocking up because of COVID. Even I've seen a lot of articles that talk about it, but we already identified about a month ago that we're heading for a food shortage. So we decided to expand our agricultural programs in Edo State through what we call the Edo Independent Farmer Initiative. So helping these farmers to quickly ramp up their production so that we can be ready when that time comes, and it's more of an opportunity than a problem. So for me, I believe that the future of work is the future of demand. And why do I say this? Because every business out there every successful business out there should be meeting a demand. And work comes from businesses, right? Work comes from, okay, I saw a problem, I want to fix it. So now I need to employ people that will help me to fix that problem, or I need to start my business that will help me fix that problem. So everything job creation should always be demand driven. It's always about demand, because if there's no demand, the job will not exist in the first place. So when we look at the future, I like the fact that a lot of the previous speakers mentioned the fact that the future of work is not just tech. The future of work is, what will this world look like, and where will the issues be? How do we prepare people to solve those issues? Even though we know tech is a big part of that. So for me, I see it in 3 dimensions. First of all, what will we do? This demand we're talking about, what will be going on? We know that the rise of machines will change jobs. It will eradicate some jobs and it will create some new jobs. The future of work is also changing in terms of how we do those jobs. So talking about the kind of skills that will be needed. And then, of course, we all know that the gig economy is growing. For us, for example, a majority of the jobs we created through our innovation hub, there are jobs within the gig economy. They are working on Fiverr, they're working on Upwork. They now have the skills. They know how to deliver jobs for clients. Many of them don't want to work full-time because they want the freedom of working for anybody, anywhere, at any point in time. And of course, a lot of collaboration. That's how work is already changing. Now, we all know that many of the predictions we had for how work will be happening in 30 years' time have all come to 2020 because of COVID-19. So all this is an accelerated process already going on. And then where do we work? Work will still happen in physical locations, but a lot of work is already transitioned, into virtual. I know, for example, in the Edo State government, many things that changed as a result of COVID. His Excellency has already decided we're just going to keep them this way because it's more effective. Your time is better spent. The time you spend traveling, you can just be online, do whatever you have to do and still get on to do other work. So many things that have changed are not going to go back. That there's just going to be this nice blend between virtual work and real life work. So I know everybody here has seen this before, the World Economic Forum data on the future of work, skills that will be needed, problem solving, analytical thinking, emotional intelligence, because no matter what machines have to do, humans are going to the human part of humans becomes more important. So things like empathy, emotional intelligence, these are all things that are going to become very important in the future of work, the skills that young people need to be learning. So to the question and the topic I was giving, what should government be doing and what does the private sector need to do? First of all, training, because the skills that were existing, some of them are still going to be relevant, some of them are going to go away. So we need to get people ready. And when do we need to get them ready? So we need to get people, I'll give an example. When this lockdown happened in Edo, we couldn't do a full lockdown. So the governor decided we should do a partial lockdown because a lot of our economy is informal. And if we had done a full lockdown, I'm sure we would have had total chaos on our hands. At the same time, we have a small percentage of businesses that are online, that even have the processes. So it's thanks to the Innovation Hub that so many businesses had started already transitioning, but we still have a majority of businesses that are not online. So things like business digitization have become so critical and important for us. So training in that area, because an entrepreneur is not just going to pick it up. Some people will pick it up on their own, but some people need help. They need support to be able to acquire those skills. Artificial intelligence, soft skills. In 2020, I can't believe we're still fighting this battle to have soft skills as part of the curriculum, as part of I mean, I remember when PGFA, that's what my organization, Postgraduate Finishing Academy, when we started, we're 10 years old this year. When we started, one of our major things was, okay, soft skills has to go into the university curriculum and be taught properly, not just like for the decoration. And then it also has to go all the way down into secondary school. But you still have, it's still the topic we're discussing today, 10 years later, with all the advocacy. Now, what does this mean? For me, it's not just about soft skills anymore. Policies we have to make policies as a nation that help our educational system to be nimble. Because if I remember when we finally got the National Nigerian Universities Commission to sign off on having employability skills in higher institutions, that was about 5 years ago. Until today, it hasn't still been implemented in all the higher institutions. So now we're talking about artificial intelligence. Are we going to spend another 5 years to get that into the curriculum when the whole world will now be talking about virtual reality? Like, what are we doing? The way our education runs now needs to change. It's not just about updating it. We need to change it completely. And that has to come from government policy on how education is managed, how education interacts with private sector, and how it shouldn't take there shouldn't be so much bureaucracy in making these things change. I'll just say that way, short and simple. And then also government needs to support SMEs a lot. If we look at COVID, many businesses are not going to be able to afford their rent after this because they had to practically shut down. We've done a lot of studies of how COVID is affecting businesses. And we found that a lot of even small businesses who had built up their savings because of this issue now, they have used those savings to take care of their families. So even when lockdown is over, people are getting back to work, but the money is no more there to go back into the business. So so government can support. An example is what we do with our Innovation Hub, where we give them free internet, we give them workspaces at a very low cost, and we give them so many services, just like the production center. The same thing we do at our agri-cluster, where agri-processing happens, but it makes it very affordable, and you're giving these businesses everything they need in one place, so they don't have to struggle too much on their own. These are things government can do. Private sector really can, and then government can also incentivize the private sector. Because, okay, if the universities or if the schools or the educational institutions are not giving me what I need, then I'm going to use my money as a business. Let's say I'm a business person now. I'm going to use my money to train these guys. I'm going to employ them when they don't really know, and then I'm going to have to get subpar performance from them while I'm training them. Then government can incentivize organizations. So good examples are things like internship and apprenticeship schemes. We did one, we've done like 3 batches actually in Edo Jobs, where we find organizations that can easily expand, but they're struggling to expand because of maybe skills gaps. And then we place people in the organizations and we pay the salaries. So by government paying the salaries, I'm incentivizing you to employ this person that doesn't have experience, rather than, wait and look for somebody who might have the experience. Okay, if you can, it's more or less like you are training them for me for 6 months while they work with you. And those have proven to be quite successful. But there are other ways that government can incentivize the private sector to partner. Because at the end of the day, if the jobs are coming from demand, then the people that are interacting with that demand directly are the businesses, the business owners, and they can tell you what skills are important right now and what skills are going to be important in the future. So I'm summarizing it there because I see the time, and this is just a picture of some of the programs we have done in partnership with the private sector. I just wanted to show you guys a picture of Edo Innovation Hub, and then we have some projects there. But the whole idea for all these things is that we interact with the private sector, we find out where the jobs are, then we train people to take advantage of those jobs. And this should start as early as possible, not only when they are already out of school and stranded. We try to go as young as possible. Yeah, and in summary, I'll just say that the world is changing, and it's changing fast. It has changed. Even in 2020, it has changed a couple of times. So the challenge for everybody, government, private sector, is how can we bring the young people up to speed as quickly as possible. And the good thing is that the Generation Xers, they are very adaptable. So if we can just tap into that, we can we can, get things going. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for both of you for those very deeply enlightening presentations and discussions. I think at every turn of the conversation, I was fascinated by the work that you're doing and your dedication to job creation. So I think one of the first questions that I want to ask is, you both spoke a lot about how you're providing resources and training and access to funding for a lot of entrepreneurs and businesses. And I appreciate that we don't really see this digital divide that we talk about in terms of who can access the resources that you're creating. So how do you make this information available to everyone? And how do you ensure that the work that you're doing isn't stratified within a particular group of people?
So I'm happy to start. So, I mean, Lagos is huge, just the population, almost 20 million people plus maybe. So the local government structure in our case is very, very strategic, right? And I think it's identifying what structures exist. So for us, the local government structure is very important, but that's one. The second thing is, one of the things that we didn't want to do as government with the LSETF was reinvent the wheel. So it was very important to us to map out existing stakeholders in the conversation, right? So whether these were for vocational training centers, whether these were associations, cooperatives, people like that, who were already doing the work of bringing people together, right? So if you had like an artisan association, for example, there is no need, do you understand? So, I mean, even basic as tie and dye association, right? The taxi association, right? So it was very important to us to leverage people who were already gathering people together and building community of entrepreneurs or building community of people who needed skills. And so we would typically channel our programs through these groups beyond an open call, that's put in the public and all of that. So the local government structure, because some people, they don't go beyond their local government, right? So if the information doesn't meet them there, then there's nothing that they can do. So we actually even have like stakeholder engagement. So we're a private sector organization. If you had a new product, we'll go and do activations, right? We typically do that, but just to call people to come and access our programs, right? So that's it. I think leveraging existing networks, associations, and obviously as government, having that local government structure has really helped us.
All right, thank you. For adult jobs, what we do to ensure that everybody, accessibility in short and inclusion for our programs, a lot of what has already been said. First of all, we started out by registering people across every local government in Edo State. I keep saying there's some places we went to, we had to use town criers because there was no way to do radio adverts. That we went that remote. So we registered people and then we designed programs for different segments of people based on their demographics. So you can hear me talk about things like programs in rural areas for agriculture, or women in rural areas, or ICT in these areas. And then the way Edo State is, it's from one local government, like I'm in Oredo local government now. If I'm going from Oredo local government to our agricultural project that is in a rural community, it's like you're traveling from Lagos to Ibadan. So, and when I say Lagos to Ibadan, I mean with this, you know what's in between Lagos and Ibadan. So you don't see people for a long time, then you see a new set of people. So that means if you focus on one area, there are some people that will never benefit from the program. So this is so important for us. We have to, we have set up in such a way that we have locations in all the local governments, our partners that have locations in in different local governments. And then we are very targeted. Every program has a target group of people, the person we're looking at. For example, our Innovation Hub program, we have the large innovation hub in Benin, but then we partnered with American Towers Company to set up small centers, because now you're not talking about AI yet, you're talking about get to know how to use the computer. Set up small centers in some communities, in 4 rural communities that are about 2-3 hours away, so that they are not totally cut off from benefiting and participating. We always have to look at that. And then for everything we do in Edo Jobs, we advertise it widely. We do newspaper adverts, we do bulk SMS, we do TV, we do radio, so that, because if you don't know about an opportunity, you can't participate. And it's government, so we can't run away from the fact that people, the general perception of government has always been connection is who you know. So you can't, if you don't know anybody, just don't bother. So for us to be able to get people to be, I mean, with the kind of governor we have now, all that is out the window. So there's opportunity, there's an even playing field for everybody. So for them to have that eagerness to participate, we have to do a lot of sensitization, and that helps us to get people that would normally not even touch anything government to get involved. And then by them sharing their stories, then more people get involved. So we have programs targeted at even people with living with disabilities. We just keep modifying our programs. And then for us, location is big, because you can't just tell people to come for a 2-week training and they're coming all the way from another local government. That was one shock for me, actually, when I drove around the state and realized that, no, this is not like Lagos where I can just be in Ikeja and say I'm central. Everybody come here. No, no, no. So those are all the things that we put to make that happen.
Awesome. I really appreciate like how intentional you both are about your reach and connecting with different groups of people. But in both your experience, it seems like you've had the opportunity to work directly with youth and to speak to them and really engage with them in this job search and job creation discussion. What are some of the concerns that you're hearing from our young adults, and how do you think employers can sort of hear these concerns and start to address what the fears are?
So, I mean, I have my own personal sort of ideas about that, but I'll leave that for now. But the point I think I'm making is that, look, this thing is a two-way thing. There's what your complaint is, but there's what you have done, right? To take control first, right? Because even if they drop the opportunity in front of you, right? Especially with our case where, we're training for free, especially with our skills program. Some people have the school of thought that you should never give anything out for free, just because they feel like people will value something if they at least paid a little bit for it. And I think that there is it exists. So we find, so I'll give you a real stats, right? Our skills program is focused on young people. So you 18 to 35. But 18 meaning that you could have just completed secondary school and you would be eligible for our training. And then obviously 35 meaning you could have gone to university, you couldn't find a job, and you feel that this is a pathway, right? And what we find is when you get to the point of job placement, so you find them jobs, send them for interviews or whatever, we find that the graduates, right, tend to turn down the jobs, right? Compared to a young person who has finished secondary school, has gone through this training, and will be glad to take up that job, right? And for the graduates, I guess to their mind, it's like, look, I'm better than this. But the truth is, it's a pathway, right? You don't have to end up there. You're giving yourself a start, right? And bear in mind that they were not doing anything prior to that. So I feel like if you're looking at it from the point of view of that person, they'll tell you the employer doesn't want to pay. But the truth is, knowing that this is a pathway and you have your foot in the door, why don't you get in the door and then walk your way up from there, right? So that then works both ways, and really it's about perspective depending on how you're looking at it. So that's one. I think on the other hand, to be honest, I feel like when you're, and I would use our context, when you're in a place like Lagos or Nigeria where unemployment rate is really high, I know people feel like getting a job is you're on the other side of the statistics, right? And it's better. But I think that ultimately, and I preach this, that's why I said personally, I actually have a book about it. I think that your career is in your hands. You must take charge of your career. You must be in control of your career. So nobody's going to do that job for you, right? And that's what differentiates if I have a pool of people who I give free training, and whether they take up placement, whether they grow from there versus those who, just get the training and still end up where they are at or not. Do you know what I mean? So it's fundamental, whether it's government that provides that opportunity, whether it's private sector, young people need to take charge of their career, understand pathways, and take advantage of those pathways. Because I feel like everything that you're going to find is going to be in the sort of area of they don't pay enough, I don't get enough stipends, all of that stuff, but the truth is, take advantage of that opportunity and make the best out of it. So yeah.
Okay, lovely. I think I would agree, but then I just want to also say that, for a lot of things young people complain about. Yes, money is not enough, but also we have a lot of complaints. Young people are trying to figure out what to do. And there's so much conflicting information. Somebody says, go and get a job. Someone says, no, if you work for somebody, that's you don't have a vision, and then go and start your business. So then today it's tech, tomorrow it's something else. So they have a lot of confusion, but the answer is still the same. I mean, the answer is that what you have to do now, do it. That's the answer I give. Whatever your hand finds to do now, do it well, do it excellently. It will open up the next opportunity. Take your career in your hands. I mean, Boss said it all. It will open up the next opportunity that you will take, and then you will go to the next level. So you keep growing. But we have a lot of waiting for the right thing, waiting for the right job, waiting for the employer that would appreciate me, waiting for, after I read this whole course, you mean you want to tell me I should go and do this other job? So the idea is whatever opportunity is in front of you, take it and do it like that's all there is. My mom taught me that if you are on a job and somebody sends you to your boss, because maybe you come in as an intern or a copper, and they're seeing you like, oh, this is just one other regular intern, and they send you to buy rice. She says, buy the rice like nobody in the world has ever bought rice before. And then they'll be like, if she can do this for rice, I better give her something better to do. But then if you do it anyhow because you think, oh, it's beneath you, then they'll keep reducing the value that they place on you. So whatever you're doing today, you do it like that's the best thing ever. And then something else open up. And then for the employer, you mentioned what can employers do? Honestly, my first reaction to that question was, employers are doing enough already, please. The struggle to keep your business open is already enough headache for you to think about. And then you have vacancies and you're employing somebody, you're going to pay the person's salary. So employers need to stay open and give out job opportunities, and job seekers need to take these opportunities and make the best of them. I think the only other thing I can say is that employers can create more learning opportunities for young people to come in and learn, at least because the serious ones will always rise to the top, and then you can now take it from there. So that's it. Thank you.
It sounds, both of your responses seem to just echo what Benga had said earlier about pacing yourself, and everything is a stage and it's a journey. And I think that's important for us all to remember. And so I guess one of the next questions that I'll try and transition into now is we've talked a bit about COVID, and not that this discussion is centered around that, but some of the opportunities that have come out of the challenges that we're facing now. So you mentioned the Edo helpline, and then you also mentioned now you have this blended virtual work. I guess, are there any other things that you see just as opportunities in light of the current difficulties, and how you can encourage youth to make the best of this time? What can they do during this maybe downtime or unemployment season or difficulty that can position them to withstand everything once all of this subsides?
Okay, I think I have just two main things to see. First of all, many, okay, I went because you mentioned Edu Helpline. So I guess I assume the question was for me. Okay. So many universities reduce the prices of their courses online as a way of supporting the whole COVID fight. And this is the time I feel young people, if you are locked at home, sit down, whatever the cost is, these courses have been hugely discounted. Harvard has done some free courses. Everybody's discounting courses. Take some serious courses that you can add to use to make yourself better. Then on the other side of things, just remove your discipline and just look at what you have. Like, what do I have? What can I do right now? For example, something we did here, or we're doing here during this period, is young people that like social media, that are always online. We have all these business owners who, with over 80% of our business owners were totally cut off from the markets during the partial lockdown because they don't have any form of online presence. So we said, okay, we can take the business owner and start teaching him how to use social media. But I'm sure if you try to teach an older person how to use social media, you know that is a whole value chain on its own. I don't even know. So instead of you struggling to start from scratch, yes, we do basic digitals. We did a lot of online digital skills trainings. But let's take this young person who's already always on social media and then pair you up. So we created what we call digital agents. So they're not necessarily your full-time staff because you can't take on new staff right now, but they will give you their skills to manage your online presence, and they can do that for different businesses and make money off that. Because they're taking the orders, they're interacting with the client, they're getting the things for you, and then they're fulfilling the orders. We're really trying to push that out there, during this period. So I feel that as a young person, you can look at the skills you have right now, find out where they can be useful. We taught we taught Edo jobbers how to make face shields, so that, because we know that a lot of people are importing them, we taught people how to make face shields. Very simple way that costs about 500 naira for one, and then they're making face shields at home and selling to their friends and family. So it's all about being adaptable, being creative, look at what's available, and then just find a way to tap into it.
Thank you for that. And Buster, I'll try and turn to the next question to you on corporate social responsibility. In light of everything that's going on, what do you think the role is for our employers who are listening in, and how can they also be a part of this conversation?
So, the first thing is, if you were a business, depending on what category you are, so whether small, medium, or large enterprise, and you were not thinking about sustainability before, then this is the time to start thinking about sustainability. And sustainability is not corporate social responsibility. Sustainability is internal and CSR is external. Some of the people who have gone through my training, at least I can see one person who will know that that's like something I'm always happy to say. Sustainability is internal, right? So if you were a business and you never ever thought about risks and threats to your business, then COVID-19 has presented you an opportunity, right? If you thought, you know what, I'm part of society, but it doesn't really matter. I can handle, I can do my little business in the corner and I'm okay. Government does not affect me. Nobody affects me. Everything's fine. Nigeria, for example, in this context, does not have tornadoes or whatever. So I'm okay, right? Unfortunately, you can see that that's not the case. So I feel like it's an opportunity for a lot of businesses to, first of all, really look inwards to what are some of the measures that I have in place, right? Do I have any enterprise risk management systems, right, to manage my risks, whether these are reputational, whether these are people risks, whether, you first need to do that work. And when you do that work, then you might be able to identify what is most important, because there is one thing that perhaps if you do could help to sustain you at least to the next sort of phase, right, for where we are. So it's so important that a lot of businesses sort of think about that. I think that one of the things that has come out of COVID, especially in Nigeria, is that a lot of private sector businesses now see that they can collaborate, even though so co-opetition, right? Even though they compete. And I think that COVID was a blessing for that, because I feel like those of us who were on the inside of private sector organizations used to try to tell them that, look, we can collaborate even though they are competition, but they didn't see it, right? But with COVID, right, which is a coalition of private sector organizations coming together in Nigeria to fight COVID, I mean, these are competitors, right, who don't really care for now about, you know, what markets are you stealing, market share and all of that. They're saying, how can we come together to really keep COVID out? Right now, COVID is the only enemy, right? And so I feel like the power of that must be sustained post-COVID, right? And I feel like there's a lot that can come out of that in terms of projects. You see what I'm saying? So there can be innovative ideas that can come out, co-location, you know, everything co-creation, right, can come out of that and lead to job creation and lead to, I mean, you know, it's interesting because the UNDP is even doing these accelerator labs, right, where they're bringing people of different skill sets. Because one of the things, and what I was going to say in response to that question that you also asked, Uki, was a lot of young people need to understand that people right now, today, they are looking for problem solvers. If you can solve a problem, you have a job. So let's wake up first and know this is true. Work, people are looking for problem solvers today. So it depends on what problem you can solve. Then go and look for who wants to solve that problem. Value, right? So it is so important. So I feel like employers also need to innovate. They need to pivot, all of those good things. But I feel like they need to identify from the inside first. Because look, if you're doing corporate social responsibility that's not linked to your sustainability, it's the waste as well. It can as well just be marketing or PR, right? So this is what I'd say.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And in all of that, I was getting takeaways for young entrepreneurs themselves. And as businesses are doing these things, as they're being introspective and building some resilience towards just the challenges in society, entrepreneurs can do that too, and they can also partner and they can come together. So I really appreciate both of your insights and this very, very rich conversation that we've had. I'm cognizant of time and I know we're sort of winding down. And so now I'll turn it over to Kumbi, but I know I speak on behalf of everybody in saying it's been wonderful hearing from you and we really appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow, that was such a great session. I took a lot of things from that session, especially when you talked about, you know, what government needs to do and the role they need to play in terms of combining their efforts with private sector. I've seen that happen a lot of times, and I particularly like the fact that both of you actually worked in private sector and then moved to work with government. That's something that doesn't happen all the time. And for Uki, it was exactly the same function she was doing at POISE, which is always what we see, because we have so much to say to government when we're sitting on that side of the table. We think, oh, they need to be doing A, B, C, and D. And then someone says, oh, fantastic, this is the opportunity, I'll come fix it. So, but I truly, of a truth, I really admire the heart you put into the work. And I speak to both of you because I know that it's not, for you guys, it's not just about lip service, it's the commitment to seeing that you are able to not just transform the lives of the people that you've met before, but to expand that conversation. And the reason why we had this conference is to spotlight people like you who are doing incredible work and who are able to be that leading force, you know, that idea of who a young person should be and what the potential that they can have when they are put in positions of authority. So I'm so excited to have you. Always a pleasure to see your work and to see how, you know, how amazing that you're doing in the fields that you commit to. Thank you so much for the work you do behind the scenes. Thank you for Abosede for the work you're doing in trying to get women in government. I know that beyond careers, that's that's so much of your focus on how to get more people in government. And I really do hope that we get to see all of that. So I will do the closing remarks. I want to use this opportunity to thank my excellent moderators, Tokes, Wura, as well as Grace, who have done tremendously well. And I would like to thank every speaker we've had, from Peter Blair to Roberta Bassett, as well as Gbenga Totoye, Uki, and Abosede. I really, really do appreciate you. It's been such a mind-blowing conference. We've had people all over YouTube as well as on Zoom here. We had, there's also people watching us on Facebook Live and in different places that we've put the conference. So thank you to everyone joining us from across the world, and people who would like to send us an email. You can do that actually to Sheshewa, the same mail that you got. Would like to hear your feedback. If there's anything that you think, oh, we didn't cover, I totally can imagine that. So would like to hear your experiences. There's taking you into where this conversation is leading to. If you've noticed, we've always mentioned Africa in all of our conversations. Even the first internship conference, it was actually about why internships are key to developing talent for Africa. Uki as well as Abosede were a part of that conference, and I was so excited to have them here again, and I'm sure you now know why. And this year's conference is about the future of work for Africa's youth. And so you'll be wondering all of the time, why is she mentioning Africa, Africa, Africa? Yes, it's because we share all the same challenges, actually, and some countries are doing better than the other, but if we can have the same voice when it comes to internships, when it comes to skills development on certain issues, especially when it comes to data and job creation, when we go with that united front, there's a lot that we can achieve. And for that reason, we have decided that this will be transitioning actually now to the Africa Internship Conference. So this is going to be, let me take this. Can everybody hear me? Okay, let me play. All right, so we will be moving the conference. It will no longer be the National Internship Conference, and that's why we have Grace from Ghana joining us on this year's conference to moderate. We will be having the Africa Internship Conference, and I will be joined by people from across the continent, from Kenya, Tanzania, Senegal, all across the continent to have these conversations. And I look forward to when the next conference is going to be. You can send us emails. Please kindly follow the conversations on Twitter, as well as so many things that we're going to be up to at Shishawa, Nigeria. And yes, thank you so much for coming. I really did enjoy my time here. So have a great time, and bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.